And then,
Right.
and hold on,
I'd
Commissioner,
like to invite our,
Ed's gonna do his dance.
just as a reminder, everyone, I'm opening the webinar to virtual public at this point.
Can pull the mics already.
It's totally catchable.
Okay, I was trying to make sure they can hear them back. We can let everybody. So,
and we invite our guests, help themselves to some of the refreshments. Please drink.
Thank you.
For the record, my name is Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. This morning, the board has been in executive session to discuss a potential real estate transaction that the premature disclosure of information discussed may give a competitive bargaining advantage to a person adverse to the school trust interest. The discussions were authorized under 24-6-402-3A1 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. No decisions were made in executive session and no board actions were taken in executive session. The board is now back on the record and ready to proceed with its open agenda.
Thank you. First, before we begin, I would like to just acknowledge Jared and Peggy and Edie and others for your incredible hospitality. You have really welcomed us and to the folks of Moffat County and the surrounding area. We are really pleased to have been welcomed so generously, and we want to thank you. All right, we will move into our regular meeting, and the first item is open public comment period for non-agenda items. Is there anyone who'd like to speak to the land board?
Well, I would like to.
Right, so Ed, do you want to just explain, excuse me, Nick, do you want to just explain a little bit about how this can work? Would you like her to come forward or?
Yeah, if you would, to make comments related to anything that's not on the agenda, which is this moment now, if you wouldn't mind just coming maybe and sitting at this chair. Please identify yourself first and last name clearly.
Do you mind if I stand?
You can stand as well.
Okay, I just want to make sure we can pick up your.
Sure.
Please know that this is recorded. This is public record.
Okay.
There are folks participating virtually, so the audience is about twice the size as what's in the room.
Okay,
And we'll just acknowledge that there are 4 commissioners present and 1 commissioner, Commissioner Scandon, is doing this virtually.
okay. Can you hear me okay if I talk from right here? Yeah. Okay. My name is Lane Yacvedo. I'm attending your meeting today with my husband, Jared Yacvedo, and my brother-in-law, Justin Yacvedo. We run a ranch named Saddleback Ranch, just south of Steamboat Springs on the Trout Creek. We also have a state land lease that we use for our operation. My goal today, I guess, was just to come and so you guys can put a face to our operation when you're making decisions that affect our business and our livelihood. We are the 3rd generation on our state land lease. So we've had it since it was put into the land stewardship program. Currently, we run about 30,000, depending on the year, yearling Angus on our ranch. We also run agritourism business. That really is what supports our business. So we use the grazing rights and also the recreation rights on our property to support all of our families. We also employ 3 other families on our ranch, so we have a good added value into our community as far as employment. We do dinner rides, snowmobile tours in the winter, sleigh rides, and horseback rides and cattle drives. We also enjoy using our place to educate the public about agriculture and also our heritage and our community's history, really. I think the most concern that we have right now and what we've heard is that there's a policy in the making that could maybe split our grazing lease and our recreation lease to the point where somebody might be able to outbid us in our recreation lease, which would drastically affect our family. We all have children that we're raising on the ranch and also our business operation. And so that right now is at the top of our concern. Obviously, when you have a piece of property that your family's been utilizing for the last 3 generations, it would definitely turn the way we operate in a way that we make our income. The other concern for us is that when the stewardship program was first put into vote, it was a 20-year lease. And that gave some security to that for us. And now that the leases seem to be getting shorter, where we're looking at 10-year and 5-year leases, there's a lot of uncertainty when we're looking at our next generation of our family, and will they be able to steward the land and create a business and support their families the same way we have. And that's something that weighs heavy on our hearts as well. Also want you to know that the property that we take care of is, because it's been inherited lease, is really, it's a value to us, and we treat it like our own. And every year when our lease comes up, we have to think about, what if we don't get it? It's hard on our family. And so those were the things that are heavy on my heart that I wanted to share with you. And I hope that when you're making these decisions, you take those points into strong consideration.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Is there a website of your business or your tours?
Yeah, we're at saddlebackranch.net.
.net.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And are there other questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Scanlon? So let me ask, who might be available just to talk with them about questions they've raised? Is that
Well,
something?
I know Jared has already met with them.
Okay.
But we'd be happy to meet with them again. The policies that were referred to aren't new. The board made a decision more than 10 years ago to stop including recreational rights with automatically in ag leases, and we pursued that consistently for the last 12+ years. The stewardship, the 20-year stewardship lease that was referred to is something that was, I'll say, pilot tested, and I think there were only a couple ever issued. They both happen to be up in this area, and for a variety of reasons, we ceased doing those as well. So happy to meet with them again. I think Jared's conversation was, I anticipate was sharing the way we operate now is different than the way we operated 20 years ago. But I would certainly expect that given their history on the property, they would have a very compelling, be able to put forward a very compelling proposal and have a high likelihood of success when the lease is expired, which I think is in a few years, couple of years.
Yeah.
2026.
The hardest thing with us is we're seeing the bordering properties on our land lease selling for, outrageous prices. And so when it comes to us thinking of having to bid again for our land, and now they own border ships, and they're purely just using it for recreation purposes, we're going to be someday we're going to be in a financial battle that we're not going to win. We just can't afford it. We don't have the funds that these second homeowners are bringing into our community. And it's unfortunate. I know that they wouldn't care for the land that we do the way we do. We look at, maybe the recreation coming in separately, and we're trying to graze our cattle, and they're having mountain bike races through the ranch on a recreation level, or your mind only can come up with ways that it doesn't really work for us.
I'd be happy to join Jared and have another conversation. We can talk about those things.
It would be a huge stress relief for us just to have that conversation, and it would be a great appreciation for sure.
Thank you. And Greg, maybe you can give them your card and
I can do that, or I can have Jared, either way, yeah.
thank you for coming, and thank you for your
Thank you.
stewardship all these years. You certainly have seen amazing changes in this valley at the same time. We appreciate our long history of your good work up here. Yes, Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. Yes, and if I could just ask for, and I don't know if it would be a work session or something at some point, just because it's certainly something that is a conversation that is permeating a lot of our decisions is around kind of tenure of, particularly families and as we're balancing different types of uses. And I'd just like to kind of have a comprehensive look at some of those policies, and if there are, different priorities that we should be considering with respect to different types of users and compatibility of of new uses, when we're talking about solar and different ranches and things. I'd just like to kind of have a focused conversation about that versus as it's coming up on individual applications, if that would be appropriate.
We'll note that request. Thank you so much for coming. Is there anyone else who has an item you'd like to speak to that's not on the agenda? Good morning.
Yes, I
If you'd
would.
like to just give us your name, you could come forward or you could just speak.
I bet you can
loudly
hear me
where
from
you
right
are.
I won't talk to you back. First of all, I appreciate you guys coming to Northwest Colorado to meet. It sure is a lot nicer for us not to have to go to Denver to do this, and I hope you enjoyed your stay. Anyway, my name is Ed Camaletti. Our business name is Camaletti and Sons. My grandpa, my dad, myself, and my son were included. My grandpa says passed, so there's just 3 generations on our place now. We acquired, it's a larger state lease, it's 14,000 acres. And we do have a lot of deeded ground intermingled with it, so it's not just one parcel. And we run it as a business. We run yearling steers and also have a hunting operation and a dog sled tour in the wintertime and stuff. That's part of the recreation. Our biggest concern is the same as what Lane spoke of just the stewardship of the land and what it would look like if the leases were to be split up, especially with co-mingled areas. I think a lot of the split uses could be easier done, you might say, on a smaller parcel. Not that it's better, but it would be easier. But just the consequences of having 2 separate lessees on the area, what that would look like and stuff. And then we just need some direction on, before our leases come up, what that would look like. Because our lease is due in 25, August of 25, which is essentially mid-season. So we don't know if we have to, essentially be off in August, or if you have a grace period to finish your season as far as grazing and hunting, or how that would look. That is a big concern. And when we purchased this state lease, it was under foreclosure. There's a big part of it in 20 Mile Park. It's farmed over 6,000 acres. The people before it were farming it, and it had been let go and went back to nothing but weeds. And we've planted grass and sprayed weeds and stuff the whole time we've had the lease, just to try to improve it for the state land. And as with the Yacobetos, it's part of our life. And we take care of it as our own. And it would just be hard to see, hard to visualize what it would be like without being able to get up and go to work every day and not have that part of it in your life. Because, like I said, we have taken care of it like our own and tried to better the state lease. And we were one of the first leases in the state to start paying a recreation hunting lease to the state for, their revenue for the schools and all the other projects that they have. And over the years, we've tried to increase that every year until we went into the stewardship trust, which was voted on by the people of the state of Colorado to preserve so many thousand acres. And not from energy or anything, because that was one thing when we entered the stewardship trust, it was, the coal mines or oil companies or whatever, they had, they had to do what they had to do, and we worked with Peabody Energy. Because we do lease their property for grazing also. And we worked with them, they've had to come on for core drilling, reclamation, you know, when they were subsiding, they had to go through it every day and check the power lines and stuff, just to make sure that everything was done. So we worked with them all we could and have a good relationship with the energy companies, so. It, I guess in a nutshell, that's kind of what.
Thank you, Mr. Gamaletti. Do the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Gamaletti? Yes, Commissioner Gray.
Thanks, thanks for coming in today, I really appreciate it. I think I know because of mentioning the Peabody thing, but where exactly is your operation?
We're north of the 20-mile coal facility.
Well, thanks for coming in today.
Yes.
If I'd like to follow up with what Aaron was talking about, of learning about how this works with, and listening to these folks here. When we have two separate leases, a grazing and a recreation, how is that defined with access or times or, just the arrangement between the lessees? I don't,
Well,
if
guess
they're
I'd rather-
grazing, but
I
they
will
can't ride
say
motorcycles.
we have 300 of those and they all work very well. I prefer rather than, unless you really want to,
No.
because I think we had to have a
Let's do a
comprehensive
workshop.
conversation.
Oh, no, that's right. I wasn't suggesting today. No, yeah, just
I'd
what
like
Aaron
to
was.
follow up. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll follow up.
Yeah, that'd be
I
great.
appreciate your question though, because that's a concern to us, is we don't really know if we were to be outbid on our recreation side or our grazing side, how does it work? Because it doesn't, I don't see a way that it could work, to be honest with you. I mean, got two completely opposite interests.
Well, I
Not
think-
two different operations on the same piece of property that are, competing in, like, I think I heard you talking earlier about who fences it. They're not, because if they're just hunting and stuff, they're not gonna fence it. Who sprays the weeds, who maintains the roads, who, are they gonna take care of the ground, recreation side hunting? If it's muddy, are they gonna just go driving through there? Because, they don't care about the grass and stuff like we do, because we're doing both operations. And
Good, and can you identify yourself just for the record?
Justin Yockedo.
Thank you, Justin. All right, well, I think you see that two commissioners have asked that the board have a session where we could have a discussion on that point. So we appreciate you bringing that concern to us. And I think we certainly can appreciate the heartfelt stewardship that you have given to these properties. So we thank you for that and manage them as if they were your own. Thank you. Are there others who wish to make comments on non-agenda items?
Commissioner Heath, we've got a hand raised on the.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. So is there someone who is with us virtually who would
Yep.
like to speak?
And I've got a hand raised from Bethelyn Maxwell. I'm gonna promote that person to be able to address the board. Give me just a second. See if this works. Ms. Maxwell, when you're ready to address the board, you need to unmute from your end and we'll be able to hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to the Colorado State Land Board Commissioners and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Bethelyn Maxwell, and I'm a resident of Conifer Mountain, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of Stop Full Send Bike Ranch. What we are interested in knowing is what kind and type of due diligence will the State Land Board perform on both the entity and people in charge of the entity before and during the life of a long-term lease. Here are our questions regarding due diligence that we'd like to ask. 1, how will the State Land Board verify and validate the Full Send Bike Ranch's financial obligations and projections to ensure that there will be sufficient operating costs, income to cover the rent costs paid to the State Land Board, the equipment leases, and any building mortgages and other fixed expenses? 2, with all due respect, are the State Land Board staff and/or commissioners alone qualified to make such important evaluations and decisions? It is common practice in the business world to hire outside independent third parties to make these important evaluations, and most importantly, to avoid the appearances of any actual or implied conflicts of interest. 3, will the bike ranch have sufficient liability insurance to cover catastrophic injuries? 4, in case the bike ranch fails, will the tenants provide sufficient escrowed funds in advance to cover the full remediation and return the land to its native state? For example, to specifically remediate and restore the parking lot. How can the tenants remove the asphalt and concrete and restore and rebuild the entire meadow of hundreds of aspen trees? 5, also in case the bike ranch fails, will the tenants provide sufficient escrowed funds in advance to cover the removal of the quad chairlift, its towers and foundations? How can the tenants restore and replenish the forest trees back to the land's native state? 6, finally, in case the bike ranch fails, will the tenants provide sufficient escrowed funds in advance to cover the removal of buildings and bike trails? Also, how can the tenants restore and replenish our meadow, which would have been destroyed? We'd like to ask the following questions regarding the specific evaluations to be performed on the proposed tenants themselves, Mr. Phil Bouchard and Mr. Jason Evans. 1, which specific criteria will the State Land Board and/or commissioners use to determine the suitability of Mr. Bouchard's and/or Mr. Evans's financial condition and their individual personal record? 2, who are the other investors in the bike ranch and how much money will they be putting in? Also, how much money will Mr. Bouchard and Mr. Evans put in? With all due respect, are the State Land Board staff and/or commissioners alone qualified to determine the suitability of Mr. Bouchard's and Mr. Evans's individual financial condition and their personal record? In closing, we have an excellent example of why the State Land Board should agree to meet with us. In a recent CORA request, we learned that the State Land Board has scheduled planned forestry mitigation on this property, but that you postponed this mitigation because you were concerned about our response. We are concerned about our safety. If you had met with us, you would have gained insight into how concerned we are about fire in our area and that we welcome any such mitigation efforts. So once again, South Full Send Bike Ranch respectfully requests a meeting with the State Land Board to discuss these important due diligence questions and concerns. Thank you kindly for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Maxwell. As you know, this is a non-agenda item, so we're not able to respond, but I appreciate you bringing those issues forward. Could we ask one of the staff if they might be willing to follow up with Ms. Maxwell?
Commissioner, we don't have anything to talk to them about right now. We've continually told them that at this point, the proposal hasn't gone to the county and that we're waiting for, at this point, all we've said is that there's planning lease on the property. And as many times as we've had conversations with them, we don't seem to be able to communicate that. So as you asked me last week, we exchanged correspondence. I'm just not sure what else to do at this point.
Right. Ms. Maxwell, were you able to hear Mr. Okish?
And thank you for asking that, Commissioner Heath. I was unable to hear the complete response. Was that Mr. Medina?
So let me just, first of all, I believe we have a question from one of the other commissioners.
I just wanted to ask,
And you want to identify?
I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Clark. Because this keeps coming up and it's the same dynamic every time. And it's questions that are far beyond the scope of our involvement in this, are far premature for anything that we're dealing with respect to a planning lease. But I do get the sense that there's so much action and concern, so many concerns from the community that us, if we're just emailing about this is a planning lease and moving, I'm just, at some point, we could talk further, but I'd be curious to know if it's just helpful to have a session for people to be able to vent, to say some more things.
Commissioner Clark.
Yeah.
We don't have a proposal for us. What we've said repeatedly.
Yeah.
Is that this is a local control issue.
Yep.
Statutory, that's what's required. These folks
These are
need
not
to
our
go do
developers.
this
Yeah.
at Jefferson County.
Yeah.
Jefferson County either will or will not issue a permit. And so I hope that this sort of focus and attention is occurring at the county level. And I'm guessing that the county's response is they don't have an application either.
Right.
Again, this is a planning lease allows these folks to determine whether or not the project they want to pursue is even feasible.
Right.
And then allows the county, the local control, to decide whether it's appropriate for their community. And so while I appreciate that these neighbors and citizens are concerned about this and continue to express that to us, I don't think there is a role for us yet because we don't have anything in front of us. And I don't want to usurp the county's authority in making a decision about what they'd like to do.
And I guess that's just where my confusion is coming in, is that I know that we're saying that this is a planning lease. We don't have control over all of these things. There's nothing before us. Yet more detailed questions keep coming, and I'm just trying to understand how
Yeah.
to save their time as well.
Yeah, the questions, I don't know why we haven't, now I'll take the blame. I don't know why I haven't been able to explain this more clearly. The questions are misdirected. The questions should be directed to the county. The local citizens, including the neighbors in Jefferson County, should be able to make the decision about whether or not they do or don't want this activity in their community. And if they decide not, we won't go any further. If they decide they do by approving the project, we will then enter into conversations with the proponent to determine whether or not we can reach a lease agreement. But at this point, there's just nothing else I can sit down and productively talk to them about.
And I understand that the entitlement piece of that, and if there's ever going to be a project, some of these questions are specific to more lease terms and making sure that this is a financially viable group, those types of things. So just making sure that it is clear as well that this is not, we are not in any negotiations. These are, it has been described as our developers. We don't, that is not the relationship that we have. And that those are all things that if it would go through a county process, would then be dealt with at a separate time. And so I'm just like, has any kind of timeline been provided or anything? I'm assuming yes, to the neighborhood instead of it, because everything that we've heard today is very premature. So
Yeah, if I were to borrow a term from, I think the courts use it, the issue's not ripe for discussion at this point. We can't.
So Ms. Maxwell, just in summary, this item is not an item on which we'll have a decision. So we're suggesting that the Jefferson County Commissioners are the only ones who have an opportunity to decide on this. And I would encourage you and your colleagues to address those questions to Jefferson County. I think those are good questions and questions that you should direct to the commission at the Jefferson County courthouse.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming to us today. Appreciate it. And are there others who would like to speak? Nick, do you have anyone else who is addressing a non-agenda item?
Members of the public, if you would like to address the board on non-agenda items, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Commissioner Heath, I'm not seeing any.
All right. Seeing no additional comments, let's move on then to announcements from Director Ryan.
I've got no announcements,
All right.
but happy to work through the staff report, which I think is next. Oh, sorry, we've got Doug next.
All
I didn't mean to
right.
skip over you, Doug.
So it's my pleasure to invite Deputy Director Vilsack to discuss the Executive Director's report from the Department of Natural Resources.
but you're not wearing a bolo tie, so I don't.
I know, I saw both sides of my bag. I'm
Moffett County.
Very
I put
upset.
my bolo tie on this morning. So my apologies to the people of Moffett County. First, thanks for having me today. Happy to be up here. Really appreciated the opportunity to go on the tour yesterday with you all and kind of meet with folks operating the various businesses on our lands, and also hearing from the local representatives, county commissioners yesterday. Obviously, a lot of challenges up in this part of the state, but I think the state land board, being such a large landowner and kind of its involvement in kind of all these areas, also has a great opportunity, I think, to help come up with solutions to some of those challenges too. So really great to be up here talking with folks. As most of you probably know, the legislative session wound down last night. Having been in that building or spent a lot of time in that building, I think the only people that know really what happened are probably the people that were sitting there at the moment. So we're having every detail about what lived and what didn't live in terms of bills last night. Thankfully, we got a lot of our stuff done early, thanks to Alice Cosgrove, who's done a great job for us this year as our legislative director. Just as a quick recap, although I know you've heard some of these before, we had a few department bills kind of reauthorizing our habitat partnership program and our non-game species checkoff program, which are kind of some of CPW's key programs, both for kind of working with our agricultural partners for HPP, and then also funding for non-game species through the checkoff program. We also got a bill passed to protect sensitive wildlife data. We've been getting more and more CORA requests, requesting information about the location of big elk, things like that, which we were concerned about. And so that bill, Senate Bill 169, will let us withhold some of that information specifically about kind of specific locations of rare plants, of wildlife species, because we have so much collaring data, for example, now. So that'll be helpful and could impact the state land board in some ways, some of the data you may have. We also passed a bill kind of extending our conversation around search and rescue in the state of Colorado. We've been trying to think about how we put new resources to those programs with increasing outdoor recreation in the state. So that bill will move the current program for search and rescue from DOLA to CPW, and that's actually back to CPW many years ago. That program was.
Why don't you just explain what those initials are?
Sorry, oh, did I not? I didn't acronym. Sorry, Backcountry Search and Rescue. So this is the program that helps fund all of our search and rescue volunteers around the state. There are 2,800 volunteer search and rescue folks, the community members that you probably all know in that system. With the increase in outdoor recreation is more and more stress, just huge increases in incidents, some that take many days to resolve, and also strain on these volunteers. They pay for their own equipment, they drive their own vehicles. It's kind of an unbelievable system that we have set up with very, very few resources. And so, for example, like up here in Northwest Colorado, more and more people coming up here for outdoor recreation, thinking about the outdoor recreation economy. We need to find a way to make sure they have resources to go find folks, poor folks from Denver, like some of us who might come get lost in some of these great places. So it's going to CPW, and then the Keep Out of Wild Pass, which I'll talk about in a minute too, will provide some additional funding. So hopefully $2.5 million every year into that program to help support backcountry search and rescue. So
Just interject here. When does it become effective that when you could get the Colorado Wild Pass? Can you just clarify that?
So that bill passed last year. You will start seeing that on your car registrations as of January 1st. So it'll obviously take a year for it to catch up to everybody because everybody registers their vehicles at a different time. And so that pass, the Parks and Wildlife Commission set that pass price at $29 about a month ago. So in comparison, the existing state park pass for an annual pass is $80. So pretty huge discount because we're kind of opening it up to folks around the state. It'll be on your car registration. If you don't want it, you can take it off. So if you really don't want to kind of use state parks or kind of get some of the other amenities from that pass, you don't have to have it, but it will be right there on your car registration. If you do it online or kind of send in a check, it will be on the postcard that you get. So very, very excited about that.
So does that mean just by driving into parks, just with our license plates that?
Yep, will not even be doing kind of stickers for those passes. The goal is to have enough participation, Keep Colorado Wild Pass, that we still will be able to do enforcement. There'll be kind of like a CPW logo on your car registration. We're going to try to make it so For example, if you want to walk in, you can have the CPW app and it can say you have the pass, things like that. So we'll be able to do enforcement, but much probably less so kind of at the gate, you know, kind of looking at your pass and your windshield, that type of stuff. And again, the goal for that pass was to say, all right, well, everybody in Colorado generally supports the outdoors. You know, we should make sure everybody's paying in, not as much just massive hunters and anglers, for example, would have been paying for the system for 100 years. So that's kind of the theory too, that, you know, your Colorado license plate, hopefully if we get enough participation, kind of indicates that you care about the outdoors. And so we can do
I think
enforcement.
it's a wonderful idea, but if you have a favorite state park, you can be sure attendance is going to be increased.
Yes, no doubt. And I hope we've been working on kind of ways, particularly in the Front Range, to address increased visitation, because that's a concern. But some of the issues are we need more state parks. You know, not necessarily new land, but we need to invest more in kind of amenities on some of the existing properties that we own. And so, you know, we need more space for camping and things like that in the state. And the challenge that we've had is that we haven't had resources, particularly on the state park side, to make those types of investments. State parks has just kind of run at the bare minimum for many, many years. And so now all of a sudden we'll have the ability to make investments and kind of address those issues. So very exciting. Just kind of finishing up the legislative world. We also, I think just in the last couple of days, passed a new Orphan Wells Enterprise Fund. So additional resources from oil and gas operators into a fund to help clean up oil and gas wells from operators that might go out of business and disappear. So that will be a good kind of backstop to any of those challenges we might see in the future. Also, a new bill, our bill just passed recently to put $5 million to CDOT to help build more wildlife crossing structures. So for those of you that drove up on Highway 9, you've seen our overpasses there through in the migration corridor across the ranch there. So more of those hopefully in our future, and also hopefully federal funding for more of those in the future as well, it'll be coming. And then of course, House Bill 1146. So the bill that will require the treasurer to do a study about the Public School Fund Investment Board and kind of how we manage those funds passed. Bill, very happy. I know all of you happy about that. So we'll be engaged in that study. I'm sure we'll be reaching out to the treasurer soon to see when that process will get going. And also a couple other tweaks in that bill, hopefully in the short term, which will allow the treasurer to think about being more flexible in the investment of those funds. So if you remember, the 21 million is now very clearly an up to, and the kind of timing for realizing a loss, if a loss ever needed to be realized, is kind of extended as well. So great to get that through. And then beyond that, a lot of other action. I could go through many, many bills, but more money for water, particularly in the South Platte Basin or in the Republican Basin, sorry, and in the Rio Grande Basin for compact compliance, huge issues out there that we need to deal with. In the next few years, a lot more money for watershed health, forestry type projects, a number of bills focusing in on that, and an increased investment in the Colorado State Forest Services nursery. So $5 million to invest in that nursery up in Fort Collins. So for one time in a long time, we've had a good budget year, I guess, and more resources to be able to invest in these types of things. And hopefully beyond that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in the next few months as well, hopefully additional federal resources through the infrastructure bill. So we're really focusing in at DNR and kind of across agencies on infrastructure, so water infrastructure, migration corridors and kind of crossing structures, transportation funding, abandoned mines, more money for orphan wells. There are broadband, a lot of broadband money in that bill that could have implications for right-of-ways and things like that for state land boards. So a lot of resources to use. And I think probably the greatest challenge these days is just figuring out how best to deploy them and get them out the door and get them on the ground, really. So beyond the legislature, I'll move quickly here. Just wanted to talk about the Partners in the Outdoors Conference. I assume probably some state land board staff attended the Partners in the Outdoors Conference. We are, of course, aware of the complaints that were made about inappropriate comments there and are currently working to investigate those comments. We take our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion very seriously. And so for those of you that know Heather Dugan, she is now the acting director of CPW. She's been with the agency for 29 years. So it's been great to have her be able to step up and take that role. But we're working through our investigation right now, and we'll be in touch about the results of that investigation. In the meantime, happy to talk or address any questions. Director Gibbs is obviously very involved in that conversation. And really just for those that participated in that conference, the goal of it really is to diversify CPW's outreach and really get more folks involved in the agency. And there were a lot of great conversations there too as well. So thank you for everybody that participated. We'll be in touch and obviously do better as we work on those issues around the state too. So beyond that, a lot of other work at CPW. I could probably spend an hour here talking, but we, for example, just got $11 million in applications into our new outdoor equity fund. So we'll have a lot of decisions to make there to allocate some of those new resources. Wolves, obviously an issue, something people are thinking about up here. I would suggest, just to put a pin in this, that maybe in the next few meetings, we get CPW back in here just to give an update on where we are with wolves. I think I've talked about it a little bit just in these updates, but a lot of changes, of course, with the listing here, relisting, I suppose, in the state of Colorado. And we have a deadline at the end of 2023. The CPW is working very swiftly to meet in partnership with Fish and Wildlife Service because of the listing. So moving forward on that. And then beyond CPW, I think I mentioned COGCC and the Orphan Wells program, which is new. Water, lastly, of course, is a huge component of DNR's work. I think as was mentioned yesterday, and maybe kind of a flashback or a look back at January, the Yampa was designated over appropriated back in January. And so as was mentioned yesterday, things are different here in terms of working with the Division of Water Resources. You want to get a well permit, for example. And so that's something certainly DWR continues to keep an eye on, and is obviously a new thing for a lot of folks up in this part of the world. And then CPUCP, very honed in on the Colorado River and challenges with drought along the Colorado River. So you may have seen news, there is a plan in the Upper Basin to release 500,000 more acre feet of water from Flaming Gorge, try to put some more water in Lake Powell to make sure that the electricity generation can keep going at Lake Powell, but obviously huge challenges in the Colorado River Basin right now, trying to address shortages and the drought. And I just, maybe on a not great note, but at the end, we'll talk about snowpack. We're looking okay up here. Good to see it be green. I heard that it snowed a couple of weeks ago, which is the result of the green grass. Southern Colorado, not nearly as good. I just looked at the information this morning, and snowpack's at 19%, and San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan, 11% in the Upper Rio Grande, and 32% in the Arkansas. So that at this time of year, not really an indicator of all kind of water resource challenges, but not great in Southern Colorado in terms of the water feature this season. So certainly always a distinction between different parts of the state. So with that, yeah, happy to answer any questions. As usual, we have a lot going on.
Are there questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Scanlon, do you have questions? All right. Thank you very much for that report. You have lots on your plate.
There's probably more.
Thank you very much. All right, the next item is the staff report. Back to Director Ryan.
Commissioners, you all read the report on the updates of some of our blocking and tackling from the past month. I'd call your attention to a couple things. As Doug mentioned, House Bill 1146 made it through both chambers. I would have sent you an announcement, but I'm holding off until the governor signs. I've been around long enough to know not to spike the football early. I don't anticipate any problems at all, but one more signature to get. Commissioner Heath, you had asked us for an update on 30 by 30, now also known as America Beautiful. That's the idea that we'll have 30% of American lands conserved, however that gets defined, by 2030. And Vanessa Mazal from the Department of Natural Resources is on point for DNR for that. She's going to come give us an update on that next month. So I wanted you to know we heard you last month.
Thank you.
let's see, we've had a couple of new hires, one of whom is with us today, Bandy Clark, raise your hand. Bandy's the new district assistant for the Southwest office. Welcome, thanks for joining us last night.
In case people don't know, Maggie's on probation.
Yes, I'm well aware.
She's still on probation. I think she's gonna make it.
And then a familiar face, you all know, Andy Bissett, and Andy was promoted to be the TRS manager, replacing Alicia Hawthorne, who moved to Ohio a couple months ago. So we're delighted that Andy is stepping in to fill those big little shoes that Alicia left. Let's see. One of the things that we're doing as an organization next month to try to keep rebuilding the culture after 2 years of hybrid and virtual is a Strengths Finders session. For those of you who are familiar with that, sort of a self-assessment tool. We've brought in a facilitator, and we're going to have the entire staff organization get together in one room again and spend a day doing that. Commissioners, if you all were interested in taking that, I mean, if you want to come participate, that's great also. But if you just want to use the tool, we've paid for it for a big group of folks. It takes 45 minutes. You just go through and answer a series of questions. It'll tell you what your strengths are from a work and personality type. It's really interesting. I've done it previously. And so if you all are interested in that, let us know, or more importantly, let Kristen know, and we'll get the tool sent out to you here, and we can work that into the overall results as well. So.
And if I can just share for, if any of you have not done it, I've also done it a few times and find it really helpful and also useful to do like every few years or so, because it can change. And it's helpful to kind of see how that migrates as well. But I think that's great that that's true.
And then the last piece of the staff report I want to call your attention to is some of the outreach stuff that's in there. But I hope you all loved the tour of the school yesterday. For me, that's just such a fulfilling and rewarding thing to see all the work we do and all the tough decisions we've got to make as an organization, and see what the end result is that beautiful school. And so wanted you to know of a couple others. Justin Osborne spoke yesterday at a BEST event in Levita. They've gotten grants to build a new school down there. Mariah Pillmore is also speaking at one this weekend in Manzanola down near you. Another groundbreaking for some BEST work down there. So it's really wonderful for us to be able to get out and see those schools. And I want you to know our staff goes to a lot of those either groundbreakings or ribbon cuttings, just again, to be present in those communities. So those are the only items I wanted to call attention to, but if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Other questions for Director Ryan? Let me just note, I think we heard yesterday that some parts of the Northwest District have not made application. Can you just amplify a little bit that information?
I heard it a little bit differently. I think Moffett has made applications. So yesterday, the school we all saw was en route. When you apply for a BEST grant, based on a whole number of factors, the BEST program asks you to come up with a local match. That is, you've got to increase your tax assessment by a certain amount. There are a whole lot of formulas that drive the amounts, but it's usually somewhere 50% or lower of a local match to match the BEST grant. So you get awarded a BEST grant, and then you've got to pass basically a tax increase on your community, your school district, to provide the match. My understanding yesterday from the superintendent, and some of the folks in the audience may know this better, was that there was a BEST grant received in Moffett, but the local match hadn't passed. That the vote had been to not raise the taxes to provide the matching funds. I think there's a Moffett County Commissioner here. Were you asking specifically?
Commissioner Miller, did you want to respond to that?
I just was thinking more local knowledge, not that you were.
Yeah, I can clarify.
Yeah, thank you.
So our bond did not pass.
Okay. Thank you. For
In a few words.
for the record, my lifeline said the bond did not pass. So-
All right,
So
thank
what, am I answering did that answer your question?
There was
Thank
a
you.
conversation, our host from Tuesday night at the wine bar, some of us went back last night in support of the local economy. And we actually talked, and she was asking if grants were available for things like new roofs or new, she was not clear that there was money available for things other than brand new schools.
Okay.
And so I shared with her that there were other options for grants, and I think she was gonna follow up with questions.
That's good. So, the bottom line for us is that the money that's earned from the public lands is used to build or repair schools in various areas. So the one we saw yesterday at Hayden is an example, and I think while we deal with much of the minutia, we also know that stewardship is important, and the revenue we earn is also important to invest in the community. Right. Are there any other items on that? Hearing none, then let's move forward. Our first item for final action is the Colorado State Forest Service League 02-111021.
Mindy Gottsigan is joining us virtually. Madam Chair.
Can you see and hear me, commissioners?
You can.
Thank you. This is Mindy Gottsigan. I'm the Conservation Services Manager for the Colorado State Land Board. And I'm here today to present an agenda item that will address the State Forest Service lease. Let me share my screen. Oh dear. It's this one. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. This lease with the Colorado State Forest Service dates back to at least the 1960s in its somewhat present form. Unlike other state land boards in other states, the State Land Board does not directly manage its forested resources, does this through a lease with the Colorado State Forest Service. The goal of this lease has always been to balance revenue generation and stewardship. The issue before you today is to approve an extension of one provision of that lease. It's a 20-year lease, and a new lease was developed by staff and approved by the board 5 years ago that contained a provision to re-examine some of the provisions of the lease every 5 years. The State Forest Service has requested an extension of that one lease provision, and I'll be presenting a little bit of the background about our lease with the State Forest Service, so you can provide, so you have some context for understanding the request to extend that lease provision. Eric Costello with the Colorado State Forest Service is also available and attending this meeting and available to answer any questions you may have after my presentation. So we can put this off in here, but the purpose of this extension of this agenda item today is to prioritize forest health and resilience on forested state trust lands. The Colorado State Forest Service lease addresses about 350,000 acres of forested state trust lands and timber resources across 32 counties in the state of Colorado. You can see that the majority of these areas shown on this map are located along the Central Rockies area of the central part of the state. And this map only shows those counties that we have timber resources in and are managed as part of that lease. This language was taken from the State Forest Service lease. It shows the goal that the State Forest Service shall manage the timber resources, of the forested state trust land and use in a manner that's consistent with sound forestry principles and the regulations and policies of the board. This is done to achieve reasonable and consistent income over time, reestablish natural forest conditions, promote healthy forest conditions, reduce the threat of wildfire, and protect and restore watersheds. These are accomplished through the services that the State Forest Service lease provides. One, general oversight of their lease revenue program through forest project planning and management. This is really the heart of the State Forest Service lease. They do this through forest product sales, slash treatments, prescribed fire plans. These are all examples of some of the types of forest projects that the Forest Service manages. Regeneration and planting plans, and vegetation management for forest health and to reduce risk. They also are responsible for managing facilities. The main facility that they manage is at the State Forest located in Jackson County. And I'll be talking a little bit about that in the future. And they also provide comments and recommendations when requested by the State Land Board on State Land Board proposed or existing leases. So the overall goal and focus of the lease right now is on improved forest health. So I'll be talking a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the changes that have happened over the last 10 years or so that have required an increased focus on forest health. The State Forest Service achieves its goals through two types of forest projects. The first is revenue generating, and the second is non-revenue generating projects. The revenue generating project achieves stewardship goals. They also produce saleable timber products, and they may be saw logs or firewood or the sale of small trees. These properties also have good access and have accessible terrain. As a result, they're able to yield reasonable and consistent revenue. The non-revenue generating projects also achieve stewardship goals, but they may have little or poor quality saleable timber products for sale. They may have poor access, and they may have challenging terrain. All of these components make it difficult to yield, to generate enough revenue for the projects to pay for themselves. As a result, the cost of these projects are often leveraged by a state land improvement account and grant funds. The state land improvement account is described in your board packet, and it's a fund that is controlled and managed through the State Forest Service. The monies from that, the monies from the consistent revenue projects are put into that fund, and they're used to help pay for these other projects that don't necessarily pay for themselves. In addition, the State Forest Service is able to manage outside funds from federal state sources, sometimes 4 times over with matches from the state land improvement account to help pay for these non-revenue generating projects. As a result, these projects also may need to achieve other goals such as wildfire mitigation or other forest health. And the State Forest Services manage all of these on our behalf. This is an example of a revenue generating project where saw logs were created on one of our properties. This is an example of a non-revenue generating project, kind of a road improvement. In some cases, these projects are much more extensive than the one pictured here. And another example of a non-revenue generating project is thinning and mastication, where there's very little saleable product left, where the area may be inaccessible. This chart shows the revenue that's been brought in from the State Forest Service projects on state trust lands over the last 33 years. And this chart shows this large increase in revenue that was generated during the 1990s when the state timber industry was more healthy. The forest had also reached a level of maturity that the State Forest Service was able to capture in terms of the wood products that were available. But you began to see this decline, and this is a reflection of both forest health, but also the condition of the statewide timber industry. This shows the total annual revenue that was brought in, the receipts from those revenue generating projects. The State Land Board for the last 20 years or more has had a revenue sharing agreement where the State Land Board received 40% of this value. So you would see a similar curve with just representing 40% of the income coming in would have been given to the State Land Board as revenue. This changed starting in the early 2010s when the amount of revenue decreased so much that the State Forest Service asked that that revenue, that 40% revenue that was be given to the state land board as income, be retained by the State Forest Service to address the forest health and stewardship issues. And so when the state forest lease needed to be renewed in 2017, you can see a large dip here. The lease that was negotiated with staff included a provision that allowed the State Forest Service to retain all of those revenues for a period of 5 years with a provision that would included a time to revisit that. And that is why we're presenting this agenda item to you today. The reason that we have a 3-year rolling average line shown on here is the forest projects that I've talked about typically occur over a 3-year period. And so the revenue and cost of those occur unevenly over that 3-year period. And that's why the 3-year rolling average line is kind of represents a more accurate depiction of what that revenue would actually be. Are there any questions about this chart at this time?
Mindy, I just have, this is Commissioner Chavez. What is mastication? On your slide, it was thinning and mastication. What actually is that?
Sure, the mastication is the grinding up of the wood material that's provided. So it's any of the, so when you have the tall tree, yeah, it's the grinding up of everything else that's left. I can have to discuss that later, like as well.
Thank you.
Next chart shows the state land improvement account balance over the period of the last 12 years. You can see that for prior to 2014, that balance hovered between $700,000 and $800,000. And starting in 2014, going down to 2016, there was a large decrease in that amount. That was deliberate and intentional, that those funds were used to build and replace an antiquated headquarters facility at the State Forest State Park for the State Forest headquarters. The board approved the use of those funds, and those funds were also matched in large part by the State Forest Service. Since that time, the state land improvement account has risen. Again, in 2017, this was the beginning of the time where the state, with a new lease, provided the State Forest Service to retain that 40% revenue that was traditionally given to the state land board as income. And the provision here is shown with this blue dotted line. That's the level of $750,000 that the lease provided, that this decision to allow the State Forest Service to retain that revenue would be revisited if and when this the state trust land improvement balance rose above the level of $750,000. Are there any questions about this chart? Okay. This is a picture of the new Colorado State Forest headquarters shop at the State Forest State Park. This was the new facility that was built to replace the antiquated facility. And then I wanted to just briefly talk about the continuing challenges that the State Forest Service is facing statewide, not just on state trust lands, but other lands as well. I will point out that the State Forest Service has many other obligations beyond just managing state trust lands. And so we're just a small part of their responsibilities. One, we still have overgrowth from decades of fire suppression. So many of our forests are not in a starting healthy condition. We've also, as you know, experienced decades of increasing periods of drought. This chart shows the Colorado statewide annual temperature over the last 122 years, excuse me. This lighter gray line shows the average annual increase in temperature over that 122 period. And the dark black line shows that trend just over the last 30 years. And although we've had fluctuations in past decades and centuries, you can see that the current condition of our current forests are really reflecting this very high increase in temperature in the last 30 years. What that does is set these forests up for increased susceptibility to disease and infestation. and also wildfire risk and the need for mitigation, especially with increasing development in the wild urban interface areas. And one of them, then the last important goals that the State Forest Service is also working on is how do we then protect our watershed resources. This is a picture from the Troublesome Creek fire in Grand County. And you can see that as precipitation occurs, these water resources moving through these areas is at great risk. So looking ahead, the State Forest Service is emphasizing recovery of forest health and resilience. It makes sense to, staff feels it makes sense to continue the diversion of those 40% of revenue for the State Land Board back towards stewardship. They're also planning and managing for the effects of climate change with increased temperatures, wildfire risk, and the continuing effects of drought. And then one of their other goals is to explore forest carbon revenue opportunities as a new opportunity that's coming up in this current period. So with that, the staff recommends provision. It recommends extension of the provision 8A little I of lease OT 111-021 to allow the State Forest Service to retain 100% of gross receipts from all timber products sold on state trust lands for another 5 years to June 30th, 2027. This will help ensure the State Forest Service can continue to provide sound stewardship of the board's forested state trust lands in an economically sustainable manner. Are there any questions and comments? And I wanted to say again that Eric Costello of the State Forest Service is available also to answer any questions you might have.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Clark.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mindy, for all of this work and to the Forest Service as well. I certainly can appreciate the changing conditions on many levels in terms of markets and climate change and all of these things that are happening and see the importance of, appreciate the importance of consistent stewardship of forest resources and how we're handling that. And so I think that this makes sense in terms of both that it's critically important to manage these resources effectively, and we have a group that is doing that. My main question is about the request itself. Both the recommendation and the board order speak to 5 years. Page 4 of the staff report lists the Forest Service request as having an agreement that requires that this retention of 100% of the revenue generated be 100% retention be reviewed every 5 years, and or when the balance of the improvement account exceeds $750,000. So I just wanted to ask about, I keep seeing the 5 years and we're being asked to vote on the 5 years. What about this other threshold of $750,000? Is that something that we should that potentially be part of this? I'm just curious about kind of where that stands, because obviously this is important work, so I support that. And I think that this is appropriate, but want to make sure that we are looking at our revenue in the future. Yeah.
I think that the short answer is if you vote to, as Mindy has suggested, extend for the next 5 years under that clause in the lease, it includes the language you're referring to. So it's it's $500,000, or I'm sorry, it's
$750.
No revenue share unless we exceed the balance at 750. So it's encapsulated.
It is. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to make sure. And is that cost sharing allocation already broken up in, like, that's detailed within the agreement? I wanted to understand that that's in the agreement now. It's not something that we'd be reviewing it and then having to do additional work at that time.
No, it's in the agreement. All we're doing is saying per this paragraph, we're going to extend this arrangement for another 5 years.
So I guess, yeah, that was just because revenue generation is, part of our, what we're looking at too. I was just curious if it would makes sense to also have us on the record as stating
Thank you.
that aspect of
And
it.
that was Mr. Okish who was
Oh,
responding.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. And could we ask the representative from the Forest Service if you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having us be your forest managers for the past, oh, I don't know how many years, 60 some years at least. We really do enjoy the work that's done on state trust lands. It varies some of the other tasks that we're dealing with from day to day, and it's really nice to have you as a partner, and it's been a pleasure to work with everyone. I suppose I should introduce myself. I'm Eric Castello, and I'm the Forest Stewardship Program Specialist and State Lands Program Specialist with the Colorado State Forest Service. I've been in this role as a State Land Specialist for a little bit over the past 2 years. And I guess the one thing that I would like to highlight is that with every dollar that the State Land Board invests in these forestry projects, especially the non-revenue generating ones, the Colorado State Forest Service brings in an additional $4 from outside sources. So that can be from federal or state grant programs that we're able to leverage funds to do work on state trust lands. And I think that's a really important piece of what we bring to the table when we're not just specifically talking about revenue generating projects. And as we've seen in the past, in moving forward, we expect that the cost of forest treatments to continue to increase and the need for those forest treatments to continue to increase. So that just kind of highlights to me the importance of being able to extend this clause in our agreement that we currently have.
Thank you. All right, any additional questions? All right, if so, yes, Commissioner Braden.
I'd just like to make the comment, I appreciate Commissioner Clark talking about the revenue side and make sure we're being thoughtful about that, but my comment is more related to the stewardship side. And you know, if we're managing 360,000 acres of forested lands, and given the kinds of challenges that Mindy outlined, you know, I think it's a really, in considering, you know, many of those parcels are surrounded by federal public lands and private landowners, you know, we're not making decisions in isolation in any way. So I feel like it's a really profound responsibility, considering that terrifying temperature graph you shared. So I think making sure that the Forest Service and the Land Board are doing everything we can to make sure that we have the tools to execute this appropriately is really important. So I think this is makes a lot of sense to make sure that that fund is adequately funded, because I think this work is really important. And if we manage this wrong, it could be really wrong. So
Right.
I think this is really.
Thank you for those comments. I agree. I think the chart that showed the temperature changes is the kind of profound chart that we all need to be looking at to recognize what we're dealing with and what we need to do. So Mindy, I want to thank you for that very thoughtful presentation. I also thank the State Forest Service for your work, and I know a very challenging year as we look at increased temperatures and frankly increased winds. So thank you very much. All right, I'm ready for a motion.
I do want to place, commissioners, I do have the board order on the screen if you would like to use that.
All right.
I move to.
Public comment.
Oh, pardon me.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Is there public comment? Thank you.
Commissioner, I'm not seeing any virtually.
All right. Smokey did not show up to speak today. All right, please. If there's- all right.
I move to approve the board order related to Colorado State Forest Service lease OT 111021 as presented in our packet.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there opposition? The motion passes unanimously. Okay. Is there any, I guess I didn't ask for a discussion, but I'm assuming that all those in favor indicate by saying aye. All right, motion's approved unanimously. Thank you very much. All right.
No, please remember when we take a break.
Oh, absolutely. Forgive me. I'm aiming to be more attentive here. All right, we'll
We can all
adjourn
second that.
briefly for a break and let's say 10 minutes. And I invite you in the audience also, if you want to
So
avail yourself of
9:45.
the refreshments, please do.
Eric, thanks for joining. I'm
There are restrooms that are
gonna,
down the hall.
I'm gonna take you out of the
And,
call.
it's a bit of a walk, but it's in that direction. Yeah.
About how we operate and make sure we've got all the information. Yep.
But I think those are the kinds of things that Commissioner Clark and ask us to make sure we're clear.
Thanks so much for coming in. Appreciate it. Good to see you guys. And I think we saw the camel lady yesterday. They was saying about.
Yeah. So we're supposed to-
Oh, that's right.
And it's all been reclaimed.
I'm going to ask that we resume the public meeting for May 2022.
Mr. Massey?
We are ready to go.
We're ready, all
Awesome.
right? And Commissioner Scanlon, you still with us? Commissioner Scanlon? We hope you can join us. The item we're going to be considering next is the ecosystem services leasing policy.
And that'll be Mindy Gottsegen again. And Mindy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. And
Terrific. We can hear you.
great. And I have shared my screen. Can you see my screen and can you hear me okay?
We can.
Thank you. I'm Mindy Gottsegen, the Conservation Services Manager for the State Land Board. One of my hats is the Program Manager for the Ecosystem Services Program. And I'll be presenting today the policy review for the Ecosystem Services Leasing Policy 300-009. As you know, the board reviews all its policies every 3 years. This is the year that was due for the Ecosystem Services Policy for taking a look at it and see if any changes need to be made. As you may remember, at last month's meeting, the board, I presented and some information on the Ecosystem Services Program and how staff was proposing a change in how it looked at conservation easements. That change will also be included in this policy today. So the purpose of today's presentation is to review the Ecosystem Services Leasing Policy. This will increase efficiency and effectiveness of the staffing decisions and the board actions. There are 5 significant proposed changes that are made. These do not include references to the updates to the strategic plan, any consistency with regard to formatting and general clarification purposes. Those are addressed and shown in the red line versions that are in the board packet, I think under Exhibit 2 or Exhibit B. The first of these 5 changes is a modification to the criteria of how we will work with existing lessees. The modification is that we will notify lessees of the proposed ecosystem services planning project during the planning lease period. The second change has to do with a change to minimum pricing. This will address forest carbon projects. These projects tend to be much larger in scope, involving thousands of acres, as opposed to the ecosystem services leasing policy, as currently working with commercial mitigation banks. Those projects tend to be less than 640 acres, very small. And so the per acre values that were used for those weren't really appropriate for these large forest carbon projects involving forestation or timber management. As a result, we changed the planning lease base rent from $1 per acre instead of $3 per acre. And secondly, we included the standard a rate escalation over time to incentivize the proponent to move toward a production lease if appropriate for that site. The third change has to do with the appraisal of conservation easement value. This was the discussion at last month's board meeting, and I'm now bringing it here to you today for action. As you may recall, staff proposed a three-tiered approach for how conservation easements would be valued. This has to do with the traditional way of doing this, which is the third tier, was just prohibitively expensive for small mitigation sites. So as staff is proposing, we are looking at for a staff estimate of the conservation easement value less than $100,000, no formal appraisal would be used. This is consistent with some of the board's other policies for land acquisition and disposition. For conservation easement values that were estimated to be between $100,000 and $250,000, we would use a standard fee simple appraisal with a diminution factor determined based on prohibited uses and the local zoning. And finally, more than $250,000, a full scope conservation easement value would be ordered that would include both the before and after values of the subject land subject to the conservation easement. Are there any questions about this this proposed change? Okay.
Questions? Seem to be.
Okay. The fourth change has to do with staff approval. It's really a clarification that staff approves the first two planning lease extensions. The standard planning lease period is 2 years. These two extensions would allow staff to approve an additional 2 years for a total of 4 years. And finally, the last change modifies and clarifies the extent of board approval on 2 items. Those are lease extensions beyond the authority delegated to staff. As you may recall, last month I came to you with the approval for you, or a request to approve this 5th year for 2 planning leases. And then finally, the last clarification adds that that the board will approve all conservation easements, not just those associated with commercial mitigation banks. And with that, I have the recommendation that the staff recommends that the commissioners approve or adopt the proposed modifications to Ecosystem Service Leasing Policy 300-009. Exhibit 3 shows the policy with the incorporated modifications.
Thank you. All right, is there any public comment to this proposal?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I'll take the corner. Not only one person has. Nice to see you guys again. Jeff Comstock. I am Moffett County's Natural Resources Director. I work for Melody Billard and the other 2 county commissioners. And Commissioner Clark, I think my comments probably are going to maybe even add to the concerns that you brought up on the first 3 issues earlier today. And also, yeah, the Yacovettos aren't here, Mr. Camaletti is, but their concerns they brought up about putting separate tenants and separate uses on pieces of land without really a fear of longevity on where that property's going. Mindy, it's nice to see you in some other venue other than Sage Grouse. But it's and I appreciate, and Moffett County appreciates the effort that you put forth to try to involve landowners, but it needs to go a step farther, guys, and you've heard this theme all morning in different topics. The landowners should not be notified and involved during the, what's it called, the planning lease period. They should be notified before that, not during that. These are the folks that have taken care of that land for decades. These are your true, and it's hard to place a dollar value on it, but I can guarantee you the amount of effort they spend on weed control and issues that you don't even have to deal with because they're out there doing it every day and taking care of erosion and other issues and managed grazing timing, those kind of things. There's a fear that that goes away when you throw an eco-service contract on it. I know it sounds good to throw, we're preserving a jumping mouse, we're preserving a sage grouse, we're preserving the big game winter range, go on and on. But the reason those things are there is because of all the years of management from those landowners that are your partners in stewarding your land. And as you said, Commissioner Braden, this isn't a one little postage stamp that you get to manage. It's part of a landscape, the private land around it, in our county here, the BLM. That integration doesn't need to start to happen after you've issued a planning lease. That integration needs to happen ahead of time. And so when you have your discussion or your board meeting about these planning leases and when to involve landowners, one suggestion Moffett County would have would be to invite a key landowner or two to those workshops. Don't have that just internally. Understand that real relationship. Second is, I don't know how many board members are aware of this. I know, Greg, you are. There is a standing agreement with the State Land Board and what's known as the Ag Roundtable in Colorado to have any of these issues that affect agriculture go in front of the Cattlemen's Association, Farm Bureau. They put together key leaders and you guys sit down and talk about how this impacts it. And I will admit that I don't know for a fact, but I've checked a couple sources and can't find record that you guys have done the roundtable on the ecosystem services process. Have you, Greg?
We have in the past, yes. We did not run these specific changes through the roundtable, in part just due to scheduling conflicts, but in part because we thought they were pretty minor.
Okay. Well, and I can understand that. I mean,
policy did go in front.
Yeah, when the policy was created.
3 years ago.
Yeah. Right.
So now that you're updating it 3 years later, Moffett County's here to encourage you to hold off today, not adopt this policy and go back to that roundtable and specifically talk about how to integrate the landowner, what you'll refer to as the stewards on your land, because this picture is a lot bigger than just involving them during the planning process, the planning lease process. I understand the State Land Board views that planning lease process as early and upfront, but I'm telling you, the landowners don't. That involvement needs to be prior to those initial leases being issued. And so this is a controversial enough subject, ecosystem services. Imagine a guy that's been or a family that's been taking care of property for years, and they're told that now the State Land Board is going to be receiving whatever dollars per acre additional to protect sage grouse, which would be a great example up here on that property. Well, there is no better tool out there than livestock to manage your vegetation, height structures, to manage the soils, whatever you need for those grouse. And it is almost a little battle when you put a planning lease in effect and let surveys happen for 2 years and that landowner not sitting there ahead of that being talked about as being a true partner and actually being used. And so I know that, Mindy, your intent on this was genuine to involve those folks, but we're suggesting that you maybe back off of this for this meeting, sit down with the Ag Roundtable, let them flush out all the ideas that we're talking about and truly go through the process that you've set up to deal with at a roundtable.
Can I pose a question to you, Mr. Comstock? I'm trying to understand,
Sure.
and thank you for this and for giving some additional color to this conversation. I'm trying to understand kind of some things that are substantive and some that may be perception. And I want to understand, because the way we look at the planning leases is that we haven't issued a lease,
Right, right.
that is the due diligence process and that no commitments have been made.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to understand, where would it be earlier than us issuing the planning lease
Mhm.
versus is it really a
So-
matter of us really being more intentional about the cooperation with others and the other information we're gathering during that period that is being considered, as we're saying, during the planning lease period?
Right, no, very perceptive question. And that's why I'm trying to acknowledge that I understand the state land board thinks this is early, but what if you were leasing a house and all of a sudden your landlord knocks on the door and says, hey, guys, this is Bobby Joe, we're gonna tour your house right now and look around in it because we're thinking of putting it on the market. And that's the first you've heard of it. You thought they're gonna renew your house lease another year. My commissioner talks about the state land boards being their office place. This is where those ag guys do business, or a house that they reside in. Wouldn't it have been much better if your landlord would have said, hey, Miss Clark, I really am thinking about selling your house. Please be prepared that I might be bringing some people by, and you can have some dialogue with them and say, I mean, there's a totally different option that you may offer to buy it. You may offer a partnership in some way, leasing your basement out that they never even thought of. And with that early dialogue with you before your leased house all of a sudden goes on the market is what those ag guys need. And I would bet that that's a difference between a true genuine partnership with your stewards and just a business relationship that causes them to be angry at you. And I don't even need to emphasize that more because you heard it today. You've picked up on it in the first three things. It's like, what are we doing? We have a problem here that we need to address with state land board. And I'm just suggesting pre-planning. I know that's the formal early process, but there's an informal early process that needs to happen if you really want that relationship with the people who are taking care of your land.
So question then I think it's for you, Greg, in terms of, we have notice periods, obviously, for actual leases and for things, and people would see that these things are coming before the board, but is there a notice period kind of built in for before?
Well, you're nodding, but before what?
Before a planning lease is considered?
No, and I think Jeff respectfully has conflated a lot of different issues and made this sort of put a lot of things on the table that actually are just confusing the issue. It is similar to the first issue here. We can't have an informed conversation unless we have all the parties at the table. The development partners, the potential development partners, aren't interested in being at a table unless they know they have some certainty and they're willing to pay us a small fee. Say, for 2 years, we won't talk to somebody else. And in those 2 years, we will engage in a conversation with all the other lessees. It's not just ag lessees. There could be any number of lessees that we have to engage with and determine whether or not these are compatible uses. We believe very strongly that that is the time it should happen under some sort of an agreement that gives them certainty that we're serious partners. They're going to invest money and time and energy. We're going to ask our ag lessees to sit down with them and all our other lessees, recreational lessees and others. So respectfully, we disagree about when the timing should be. We feel strongly, and we've got this in all of our lines of business, that the consultation with lessees will happen at the planning lease stage.
And if I could just say one other thing kind of in response to that is that it's my understanding, tell me if this is right. Planning leases these are things that we're not soliciting. People are coming to us with proposals we have kind of categories of types of things that people may plan for, but it's usually that they're coming to us to propose that they want to consider.
We might have been proactive, but typically often they come to us.
And so, again, I think that, because I understand that perspective as well, I'm just wondering if there could be something that is more, that we be even more proactive in how we are, in making clear how we kind of have, like, if there's maybe like a formal, is there a formal kind of initial meeting of all of it? Is it just kind of notice going out? What is that interaction with?
It depends a little on the line of business, but we would, if somebody came to us and expressed an interest in an ecosystem services project. And I want to emphasize, most of these to date have been less than 300 acres. So these are small projects. Most of them to date have not excluded grazing. So at the end of the day, what we've concluded is that there's compatibility between the ag lessee and the ecosystem services use. Grazing is a necessary tool, as Jeff said. We're not taking grazing off the landscape in most cases. So yes, there would be, once we know that somebody has an interest, in this case, Mindy, schedule a meeting with the other lessees to have a conversation about what well, first of all, what would happen is the interested party can't even get on the property to figure out if the resources are there that they could make a project out of. So we would sign the lease. They would have an opportunity to go out and understand the land in some amount of detail. And then we'd be able to sit down and say, party A thinks there's a potential project here. It would take 100 acres. Here's what it would be. Party B, you have an existing lease. Would this be compatible with what you're doing? Would there be conflicts? Could we change the boundaries? How do we work together to make this happen? And then down the road, before we get to if we can't agree, we may say to party, the planning lease party, sorry, this doesn't look like it's going to work. It's too big a conflict. Or we may say, we think the pros of the advantages of pursuing this project outweigh the negatives, the impact of the grazing lease, and we take it to you. And all the lessees have a chance to come and talk to you and you make your judgment. So I think the process, which makes I think the process works very well.
So with that being said, I just think that, because I completely understand, and a lot of these are, it's something though where, as true as that is, if the perception is different, then it undermines some of the reality of that. And so I'm just curious as to if we could even, because I even heard some comments earlier that were, I understand where that would come from, where it's like, no, these two leases don't fit together, but we're saying we have many examples of where it does. So I'm curious about if it's part of it could also just be more of, we have a track record of this and being clear about those examples but also not just saying this is the right time, but fully explaining our position, but also asking some folks like what could potentially work, what would you like to hear from us as well? And it's not that we're changing everything, but maybe there are a couple extra things that we could be incorporating. I just want to at least have that conversation, and that could be added to that comprehensive look that
We can do that. I think
there.
you see we can do that.
That's all. I just want to open the conversation.
I guess my, with all due respect, all we're being asked to approve is minor changes to a policy. We're not, I mean,
Yeah.
and half of them were already done last month or 2 months ago on the appraisal side. We've already approved those. So I'm not sure what,
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying 100%, but today we're just looking at.
And maybe for clarification, we should say that there are two items here. One are activities or requests that come to us. The second are policies that we initiate internally just to make certain that things are consistent and contemporary.
And well thought out.
And so I guess there are really, I think, two discussion items, but the one that seems to be overreaching is that there's concern that there isn't input at an early enough stage. So might I suggest that we take this into consideration when we have this further discussion and think about how we can provide access. And on these items that seem pretty routine to us because they seem like internal policy issues, even that reflect that this needs to be thought out in terms of how the public might view these and have input at an appropriate time.
Well, I don't want to provide confusion. I mean, you stated that I had confounded several issues. Let me be really crystal clear. The request is that you involve the landowners prior, not during.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much.
The lessons.
Right. Lessee and landowner, I think right there is.
Thank you, sorry, guys.
Right.
I think of the landowner as as the operator that's leasing your property. I should have said lessee, you're right. Yeah, state landlord lessees, sure.
Right.
The sewer.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you have more comments on this subject or not, but that's a request.
Thank you.
And you can bring that up if you actually go through and bring that with the ag roundtable too.
All right. And we
Thanks.
appreciate
Commissioner?
that. I want to recognize, yes, that Mindy has some comments she'd like to make.
I just wanted to add that I have been notifying the lessee very early in the process, if not formally through a formal letter and inviting comments, but early on, as soon as a planning lease is issued and our planning lessee begins to visit the property to do the due diligence of wetland studies or other evaluations, I always, they're required to notify the lessee before they enter the property so that they know that they'll be out there. And then we sit down and talk to the degree that we know about it, about that project and how it might affect them. Remember that these planning leases can last up to 4 years. So it's a very long period of time. In some cases, where some of these initial studies hadn't been done, that notification might have happened later in the process. But I would say 90% of all of these leases where there was active work done with wetland delineations and things like that, that notification happened very early on. And as Greg pointed out, these planning leases don't affect the entire section that is leased. I will say that depending on how that project, if it goes forward, and we've had some planning leases, they never make it past the first year and they're just dropped because the site was found not to be suitable for any number of reasons. That we work with the lessee to understand how they use the property for grazing, how we can accommodate those needs, and how grazing would happen or not happen on the project site going forward. It is the goal on all of these leases that grazing is recognized as an important management tool. And it's in part of the long-term management plan that grazing would be allowed under a long-term process. I'm not sure how that would happen, but it is something that is being considered for all of these projects.
One quick question.
Commissioner Clark.
Mindy, when we have a planning lessee, and you said, are they the ones reaching out to
Well, I
other
reached out.
lessees to ask for the permission, or are we involved in that process?
We are involved in that process. So initially, the first meeting is I always call them to let them know that this new use has been approved on the project. And to answer the questions, describe that this restoration project may happen. And then every time then that our planning lessee, the bank sponsor, were to go out, or one of their contractors, they're all required to notify the lessee to let them know that they'll be out there so that they don't.
Assistant Director Okish, as a broad concept, we own the land. We are always the party that coordinates between our lessees. That is our responsibility. We take it as our responsibility. And so we are, whether it's this situation or any other one, we are always the one who is making one lessee or the other aware of what's happening on the property and why.
Thank you. Yeah, because that's what I wanted to get to, is that obviously that's the relationship that people understand and don't want to just be hearing from a stranger. So, yeah.
This is Commissioner Chavez, and I think every planning lease that we've looked at, I mean, there's letters from the lessees, other ranchers that for solar. I mean, they're involved early. So again, we're just making a policy vote right now. That's
All right, so let me just summarize. I think the public comment is that it's important for us to engage folks in the public as well as the particular lessee in major decisions that we're making that might incur changes. And secondly, we've had a request to table this item. And so the first point, I guess, is whether or not you wish to consider a motion at this time. Nick?
Can we check to make sure we've got public comment virtually? Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Quick hand went up from Mr. Fankhauser. Terry, I'm going to promote you to panelist and you'll be able to address us here in a minute.
I think I'm available.
You are, Terry, we hear you. See.
Well, thank you very much to the board and the staff of the State Land Board. Appreciate your presence in northwestern Colorado, and appreciate this issue. Mindy and I and Greg and others go back, gosh, Mindy, 10, 15 years on these discussions. And let me start by saying that ecosystem services and other ways of creating value from state lands are a welcome thing to lessees. It's just like everything else in life. It's the how of things. But I do think that there's tremendous opportunities, especially as we move forward and look at, different climatic sort of projects. We're working on some of those with CSU now. And I can see those working on private land, federal land, and assuredly state land. I would like to say, though, that and this could be an element of human condition. This could be an element of process. My comments aren't meant to incriminate in any way negatively the State Land Board's process, but to say that there is a real life perception out there on some of the situations that exist where alternative uses on state land, where grazing exists or other agricultural activities, that people felt surprised or they felt in a way that they did not have the ability to have their voices heard, and they ultimately at the end thought it would limit some of their use. I don't think any of us are here saying that ultimately that necessarily, even the limitation of use, curtails the state land from pursuing a project. The process is most important. And I think this policy allows for, and I would commend Mindy if Mindy is the drafter of this, you've provided a fair amount of flexibility. The one area that I would say that I would continue to have a little question about, and our membership seems to have the question about, is what's already been delineated fairly clearly. And that's really the point of notice and the point of engagement. I think it's happening somewhat early, but maybe at the point of issuing this option to explore some of those uses isn't maybe early enough. I certainly don't want to take any authority away from the State Land Board, but I wonder if it isn't a better process to at least have a consultation before that point, so that it's both well informed to the existing lessee, but also the entity that has an option out there that something may come up in that conversation that gets included in that option for consideration. It just seems to be good business to work hand in hand with the lessee sooner than later, all the while expressing to them, maybe it's going to happen. And it's not an option for them to stop it, but it's an option to have conversations and considerations to be heard through that process. So I think that I'm not pulling it up here really quickly, but I think in your policy, essentially that could be reworked in really, bear with me, really section C, existing lessees, .1, where it talks about staff communicates impacts proposed. And I'm based on Mindy's comments, I'm guessing that's that point of that option being granted to that entity that's going to go out and do that exploratory work. Maybe there's something that would be reworded to include more of an advanced approach. So, however that might need to happen in this process to sort of formally reflect that would be something that we would request if it's an ongoing look at this, if it's sort of a rewrite of that point. we think that that probably would be good. But again, let me end this by saying, good job. I mean, we want to be able to figure out what these asset bases are in these properties. And you all are leading on many of those fronts. And those will spill over to private lands and other things along the way. And really, we need to be exploring those opportunities. And I think there's a fair amount of them coming our way. So thank you for the time.
All right. Commissioner Clark.
So functionally, what I'm hearing is a request for at least one like stakeholder meeting before a planning lease would be considered by the board. Is
And I
that,
will-
so say what? Is that just simply redundant? Is that kind of, yes,
I will say bluntly, staff does not support that
Yeah.
approach.
The planning lease period is designed to give the proposed lessee enough control to want to go have those meetings. And it kicks off a 2-year process during which they meet with the ag lessee and say, and the ag lessee has the chance to say, hey, this thing doesn't work for us, or that thing you want to do. So the planning lease process is designed to do just what these folks are talking about.
Let me try to be more articulate. Here's the way it plays out. No, not the you.
No, you could do better than you do.
No, I'm sorry. Here's the way that's played out in the past. We contact, Greg Okish, Assistant Director. We contact the lessee. Hey, we want to issue a planning lease for an ecosystem services project. Oh my God, how big is it? We don't know. Oh my God, where would it go? We don't know. Oh my God, what would the terms of the lease be? We don't know. It's a non-productive conversation until we can engage the other party and then say, here's where we think it might go. Here's how big it is. Here's how it might or might not affect your operation. I've got to say, we've had enough experience in all the lines of business where when we try to have a conversation before the planning lease stage, and then the lessee says, well, I don't like it, I'm coming to the board. So now they're talking to you and you're saying to us, well, tell us about this, staff. What is it going to do? We don't know. So we've created in most cases, two very non-productive conversations. And we believe strongly that in the spirit of efficiency and effectiveness, that we have information available when we have those conversations, both with the lessee and with you.
All right, let me suggest that there are 2 items. Yes, Jared.
Northwest District Manager Jared Smith, I just wanted to add in that our renewable leasing policy does require notification of the lessees prior, or when we receive an application and prior to a planning lease. And I'm assuming there's some confusion on why we have that policy for renewable energy, but we don't have it for, there's not a across the board.
There may be, but there are some reasons for that.
Okay.
Well, and let me just suggest that this might also be an opportunity for us, if we have a workshop or a session, to look at some consistency. And the point you're making is that this might be a helpful tool to add to some other things, but worth considering. So could I separate this and say, I think right now we have 2 options. One is whether we table this. Oh, man. Sorry. That's yours, Bill.
I know when the party starts and it's just.
Forgive me. 2 options, whether we wish to table this particular item, or if we wish to work on it now and make some suggested changes, or if we wish to just proceed. Commissioner Brady.
Yeah, I think that's, sounds like I think that's what's before us. From my perspective, I don't think as a board, I am comfortable or want to get into the weeds of rewriting the policy. I think that's best done by staff. And I think that the suggestions for changes to this staff, to this policy, are well thought through. And so I think today we've heard valuable feedback from Mr. Fankhauser and from Mr. Comstock. But it's my belief that as the draft is proposed for this policy update, that gives staff the latitude to talk at the appropriate time, that there's information available with the other existing lessees, they have that latitude. We've heard feedback from our lessees and their representatives in the community. And I'm sure that Mindy has heard that feedback. But I don't think we should wordsmith the policy revision here at the board level. So I'd be prepared to make a motion.
Is there other
Advance the-
comment?
Christine.
Oh, okay. Christine.
Yeah,
Commissioner Scanlon.
thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I'm comfortable with the policy. I'm not sure that there's another trigger date for notification that would actually be workable. I think this is more of an education outreach issue, that we help people to understand the process of how this works and when that notification does happen, et cetera. But from my perspective, I just don't know that there's much to rework, other than maybe to complement the policy again with some messaging around how it does indeed affect lessees that could go out, et cetera. But I would be comfortable, frankly, voting on the policy today.
All right, thank you. Is there other comment from the commissioners? Other public comment? Hearing none, then I'm willing to accept a motion.
I'll make that motion. Make a motion to advance policy review, or accept the staff recommendation of policy review for ecosystem services leasing policy 300-009 as written in our board packets.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt the ecosystems leasing policy. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Hearing no negative vote, this passes unanimously. Let me note though, that I believe we've all heard the desire for communication and outreach that would allow us to incorporate some of the concerns that have been expressed. And we take that as a note for further discussion.
And this is Assistant Director Greg Okish, and I will add, we are scheduling the next ag roundtable for hopefully June or July, and I will add that to the agenda.
Great, thank you very much. All right, moving on. The next item that we have is the North Mountain Ranch ING fund request. Yes, good morning. We're happy to have you with us. Ready? Good to go.
Courtney, you should have control when you're ready.
Okay.
Might need a little fidget. Click on the screen anyway, and then there you go. Now the keyboard works too.
Okay, thank you.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, good morning, commissioners. My name is Courtney Hurst, and I'm the Southwest District Manager for the Colorado State Land Board. Today, I'm before you with an IND fund request for our North Mountain Ranch property in Western Colorado. Before I move on, I'd just like to point out that this opening slide does have a picture of the ranch. And in the mid-ground is the sheep camp facilities, which I'll reference a little bit later during the presentation. So this request is essentially a $625,000 landowner investment by the State Land Board for 4 projects over a period of 3 years. These projects will help improve year-round recreation opportunities, improve the agriculture resource use of the property, as well as enhance overall stewardship. The North Mountain Ranch property is approximately 11,000 acres and is in Western Colorado on the Dolores and San Miguel County line. This ranch was put together over a series of transactions from 2003 to 2014. And here you can see it's about 25 miles due west of Telluride to help orient you further. In March of 2021, the State Land Board issued a request for proposal for both the recreation as well as the agriculture lease on the property. This was the first time that this property had been exposed to the market since the State Land Board acquired it. And as such, the State Land Board solicited proposals which expanded the recreation use or supported better resource management overall. As part of the selection process, staff visited the top 2 applicants' home operations for further understanding of their abilities. And we were very impressed by Cross Mountain Outfitters, not only their operation, but their expertise. And as such, Cross Mountain Outfitters was awarded both leases in November of 2021. Included in their proposal submitted to the State Land Board was projects which would help improve not only year-round recreation use opportunities, but also provided for a very high-quality guest experience. Paired with that was their agriculture operations or proposal, which really sought to balance the agricultural use with the important wildlife resources of the ranch. As compared to,
Just touch the screen, I guess.
I see. Boom. That's pretty cool. So, yeah, as compared to the previous lessee, Cross Mountain Outfitters, their recreation proposal is more than 5 times the per acre rent received by the previous lessee, as well as the ag lease is an increase of $7,300 annually to the State Land Board for that lease as well. So I will begin by going over the projects that are part of this proposal. And the first 2 that I will mention to you have to do with investment projects into the base infrastructure of the ranch. To date, really the State Land Board has only done minor improvements, and so these would be kind of the first big projects where the State Land Board has invested into the base infrastructure of the property. You might remember that last month I was before you with an IND fund extension request for a water well for North Mountain Ranch. And the first project is really the logical second half, which is piping water from the well to the main lodge and associated facilities. The second project is for new fencing, which will help not only manage the ag resources better, but will also provide for either new boundary or new cross fence, helping to protect the ag resources of the ranch. For both of these projects, the State Land Board will be the sole contributor and is essentially performing some deferred maintenance items on the ranch. These 2 projects total $215,000 and represent that much as an investment by the State Land Board. The next 2 projects are cost share projects with Cross Mountain Outfitters. The first is the building of a guide bunkhouse. And this project will really help take the property to the next level and allow for Cross Mountain Outfitters to scale up the recreation opportunities on the ranch. The guide bunkhouse will provide for lodging for up to 12 additional people, whether it's hunting guides, ranch employees, or for the possibility of year-round guests. Included on the first floor of the guide lodge will be 3 bedrooms along with a walk-in cooler for the game that's retrieved, as well as a garage to store vehicles and other equipment. The second story includes 3 bedrooms for additional accommodations. So this project really represents a loan from Cross Mountain Outfitters to the State Land Board in a kind of an interest-free setting where we can build the lodge, and then at the end of this 10-year relationship, we will buy out the remainder of the lodge and be the sole owner of it at the end of the term. And also, part of the cost savings for this at the State Land Board is that Cross Mountain Outfitters will provide the general contracting services and oversee the construction of the guide bunkhouse.
Can you explain that? I didn't understand. This is Commissioner Chavez,
Sure.
the loan portion. Since we're putting,
Sure. I think probably that was a poor choice of words. It's not, there's no loan per such, but you know, as being a cost share project, we're not coming up with the full amount. We're getting a certain portion from them at no interest. And then at the end of the arrangement, we will buy back. Does that make sense?
if they don't extend the lease, we would, or regardless if.
I
they
think
extend-
regardless, because it will be out for bid again in 10 years.
Correct.
And do you want to talk about the rationale for the maintenance side of that as well?
Yeah,
Karen?
there is a component to that, which in this arrangement, the lessee has some skin in the game, if you will, and so not having the State Land Board foot the bill for the initial construction gives them incentive to keep the lodge in good shape, whereby we pay them back at the end of the term. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, sure. The fourth and final project is, I'm calling it the Sheep Camp project, and it's again another cost share initiative with Cross Mountain Outfitters. And essentially, here's a good picture of the facilities. So the 3 cabins on the right-hand side of the screen, Cross Mountain Outfitters proposes to move those to more centrally located by the main lodge. And then the State Land Board will use funds to clean up the rest of the site. Most of those buildings are in a deteriorated state. And by doing this, we will actually accomplish not only one of our asset management plan goals for the property, but also help improve wildlife habitat by not having this human disturbance, human presence kind of in the middle of the property. The main lodge is approximately 2 miles to the east from this site. So in total, Cross Mountain Outfitters of these cost share projects will contribute about 40% overall to the budget. And the estimated total cost of all projects is $765,000. Today's request is for $625,000 of I&D funds, which really includes a 15% contingency built into the estimated project cost of $542,000. So to review, the 4 projects tick a number of boxes. The first is accomplishes management plan goals. So all 4 projects do help the State Land Board meet different goals under our asset management plan. All 4 help to increase the ranch value. The first 2, which are the pipeline and the fencing, help us to fulfill our obligation as the landowner just for property upkeep and maintenance and usability. All 4 projects will help to support increased rent on the property. And then the last 2, the new fencing as well as the sheep camp project will help us to achieve stewardship goals either through property use or wildlife habitat. So based on the information provided to the board at the May 2022 board meeting, staff recommends approving the expenditure of up to $625,000 of investment and development funds to complete 4 projects on North Mountain Ranch. It is anticipated that the funds will be invested over a period of 3 years. Are there any questions?
Questions from the commissioners?
And I don't know if this is the point to point out, but IND funds are typically 2 years. And so I've asked for an extra year, and that's something you guys can approve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's Commissioner Braden. How did you determine the contingency difference between your request and the subtotal? And forgive me.
Sure, we can, let's go
I
back.
think this is Greg Elkish. I think I owed her the answer to that because I did it. Honestly, it was just based on our recent experience out at Lowry and the increased construction costs over the term of that project, and this being 3 years. I suggested a higher contingency than I normally do.
And in the more remote look, I mean, like. everything's
There's
hard.
that. I think, I don't know if Courtney touched on this. I'm sorry, I was doing a couple things at the same time.
Other things.
This would be a very difficult place to bring contractors into, and one of the positives about this relationship with the new lessee is that they have the capability to do the construction on most of these projects. So I would be much less comfortable with this project if we were trying to get a contractor to Montrose or somewhere. I'm not sure we could.
Compete with tighter others.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in addition to that, supply chain issues also, and increasing prices. Yeah.
Other questions for Courtney or Greg? Since he admitted he's behind this.
Is there any public comment?
Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment, please use the raised hand feature. Doyle Warbington has joined us and is on as a panelist, and I'd like to take those comments. Should be ready to go when you are.
Sure.
All right, you see me okay? I had to switch to my phone. We dealing with about 60-mile-an-hour winds here in Peyton, Colorado this morning, so my dish is moving around a little bit.
We can hear you loud and clear, but your video is out, so don't worry about it.
Okay, first and foremost, I'm Doyle Warbington, co-owner of Cross Mountain Outfitters. My partner, Zach Kroc. Again, we just want to thank you for the opportunity. We put a lot of time and effort in trying to get, North Mountain Ranch. We have a lot of history there with our staff. A lot of guys grew up there as kids, and grandkids have been involved. And so we have a lot of that place that's near and dear to our heart. And, with that being said, we want to become kind of the flagship, of these state land board properties, and really treat it as it is our own. We run a very professional operation. We run 9 different camps in the state of Colorado, this being one of our larger ones. But, with that being said, Dolores County, their whole permit process there is very, very laxed, to say the least. We've taken that a step forward, by trying to get, everything certified. Foundations are stamped and certified, and everything's engineered, everything to grade. A lot of our staff are either, licensed electricians, licensed plumbers. So all this work that's being done is going to be done by professionals. It will be inspected by the state. Although Dolores County doesn't require certain things. And we're doing that just to protect ourselves and protect the state land board. We feel it's very important, to build this type of structure and do this type of work. There again, it represents all of us, and that's what it's all about, because we want to be good stewards. Hopefully at the end of 10 years, we're ready to do another 10. I think we've started out, establishing a very good relationship. And I think it's going to save quite a bit of money with us being involved and having the resources locally to do a lot of this work. A lot of our staff have really good ties in Dolores County and whatnot. But we've got big visions along with the state land board, but we also realize that, this affects all of us involved. And we just want to be able to present it in a professional way and do things, with high standards.
Thank you. Are there questions that any of the commissioners have? I have one question. That's, could you describe briefly the recreation that you propose?
Is that requested to me?
Right, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner
You know,
Heath,
I mean, obviously, we run a hunting operation, you know, September, October, November. You know, with Telluride being so close, and other winter activities, we'd like to expand those winter activities. You know, just so a place doesn't sit dormant for 6 months because of snow. Obviously, access to and from the lodge and the you know, the facilities there, you know, will have to be, you know, either snowmobiles or tracked rangers or that sort of thing in the winter. But then also increase, you know, some of the summer activities from a fishing standpoint, you know, and trying to get some of the local youth and local kids and, you know, just trying to expand all of that. So we're trying to make a full use out of this thing instead of just a quote hunting operation. You know, we'd like to be able to offer more expansive opportunities to the general public.
thank you. Good, that's helpful. All right. Is there any public comment?
Commissioner, I'm not seeing any other public
All
comment.
right, thank you. Then I entertain a motion.
I move to approve the investment and development fund request for North Mountain Ranch improvements in accordance with the board order as presented in our packet.
Second,
I'll second.
all right. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's like a fun place to go.
And we will.
So, thanks, Courtney. Thank you. So the next item is the Weld County non-simultaneous exchange. Matt? Okay.
Morning, Commissioners. Matt LaFontaine, Acquisition Disposition Manager. This item before you today is a continuation of a final action item that you approved in January of this year, which was for the disposal of our Weld County parcel, which is located in southwest Weld County. The board set the minimum bid for this disposal at $26 million and conducted a public bid process. Overall, great news. The board received very strong offers from solid development groups. Today, staff will make a recommendation to the board on how staff thinks the board should proceed. I know you all have seen this from past materials, including those provided in January, but here is an overview of the board's Weld County parcel. It's a little under 400 acres. The remainder of a section 16 that's located approximately 2 miles east of downtown Erie and along and north of Erie Parkway, kind of bounded by county roads 5, 10, and 7. Depicted on your screen in blue is town of Erie annexed lands. As you can see, it's generally surrounding us in many ways through flagpole annexation. Excuse me. Staff conducted a best and final bid solicitation, which closed on April 27th. Through that process, 4 qualified bids were received. The respondents and some notes regarding those are up on the screen now. All of them were above the minimum bid. This table is ordered from highest to lowest bid, highest at top. Detailed economic terms of all of these bids were provided to the board in executive session this morning. Today, staff will recommend that the board approve the disposal and going forward with SLC Development LLC. Staff will also, at those terms discussed in executive session, staff will also suggest that the board approve a backup offer in the event that either an agreement cannot be reached in a timely manner between the board and SLC Development LLC, or if SLC Development LLC rightfully terminates an agreement with its board under its due diligence period. Alternatively, the board may approve only today the winning bid and not make a determination for backup offer to be selected and revisit that at a future time if it becomes, if that comes to the front, given what happens with the primary winning bidder as determined by the board. So some reasons that staff is recommending that SLC Development LLC be determined the winning bidder. It was in fact the highest bid provided to the board, and it comes with a notable premium to the appraised value. The bid has a short time to closing and has a closing that's not predicated on annexation. Lastly, the entity has adjacent development experience, which staff believes increases their ability to perform under this contract or under this agreement should they be selected. In addition to determining the winning bid, staff is asking the board to make a fiscal impact determination today. That fiscal impact determination is required by the Constitution, by state statute, and by our board policy. And essentially ask the board to ensure that on a net basis, income received from the sale will offset any direct costs to increase enrollment associated with residential funding. To dive into a couple of those concepts, there is certainly anticipated residential development on this parcel that will result in potentially an increase in school enrollment within the district. Some of those students are likely relocating from within the district, may come from out of state, maybe from within state. There's a lot of variables there. There's also a commercial development component of this, which will provide additional tax base without increasing marginal student enrollment. The biggest positive impact, fiscal impact, however, is going to occur from a shift from PIT to ad valorem taxation. Currently, the property is zoned ag and taxes are paid not by the board, but rather by our lessee, who pays a relatively small tax based on the value of his lease. Upon final construction of this parcel, depending on how it's planned out, there may be as much as 800 million or $1.4 billion in residential and commercial stock constructed, which would be subject to ad valorem taxes and yield much higher net tax revenues. Lastly, in addition to the direct proceeds that will be generated through a sale, or excuse me, an exchange of this parcel, there will be additional earnings or income depending on if these funds were to be invested in the permanent fund or into other replacement real property. So with that, staff's recommendation is to approve the disposal of the subject parcel to SLC Development LLC, to approve a backup offer with Miller United Real Estate LLC, to determine positive fiscal impact, and lastly, to cancel the ag lease as required for this exchange. Early staff conceptualization of this transaction thought there may be a longer entitlement period associated with it. The ag lease is expiring in 2024, and staff assume that would roll off during the entitlement or inspection periods. In this case, if in order to support perhaps an earlier closing than that, staff's recommending that the board authorize the cancellation of the ag lease effective the later of 1 year from today's date or the date of actual disposal. And that is added in on your screen in red. It was not included in the board materials. So it'd be an exception to what has been provided thus far.
That relative to our earlier conversations today, is the ag lessee aware of this?
The ag lessee is aware of this. I have personally spoken with him on the phone to inform him of what the process may look like going forward. That was during the bid process. As a part of the bid process, staff directly corresponds with the ag lessees and actually all interest holders on the property. Provides them a copy of the public notice that's published also in a weekly paper. And informs them that they may have 118 rights to match bids and ensure that they're aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, are there any questions or comments that I can address?
This is Commissioner Chavez. You mentioned SLC has experience. Have they built homes? And I know they have some plans, but have they actually built anything at this point?
My understanding is that if I go back to this map for a second, is that the development just south of our parcel. There we go. Which is a development called Westerly, has construction commencing imminently. So they may already be constructing or will soon be doing so. Okay.
So they've at least gone through entitlements with the city of North Harbor.
They have.
For residential
I'm sorry,
construction.
hear you.
I'm sorry. Even if the buildings aren't up, they've at least gone through land entitlements and other things locally to make way for residential development, it sounds like.
Just Commissioner Chavez again. I remember when we talked about this a few months ago that the city was thinking about a water tower. Was that brought up? I know it's not our issue once it's sold, but is that?
So staff has had numerous conversations and phone calls with the town of Erie regarding that issue, as well as in an effort to keep them apprised of the status of this exchange. It's our staff's belief that that level of detailed planning coordination needs to occur between the actual party that's going to develop it and others, and that if we interjected too early into that process, we may inadvertently devalue our land or assume other risks that were not being taken to look at the right time.
All right. Are there public comments?
Members of the public, if you'd like to address the board on this matter, please use the raise hand feature. Doesn't appear to have any comments.
All right. I know, we should say the board infrequently disposes of trust lands, and unless there's a clear financial benefit, and this is certainly in the path of development, rapidly expanding development. Is there anyone who wants to comment prior to a motion or?
Yes, I have a question, comment as well. So I feel, thank you for laying all this out. Really appreciate tables. And especially when we're trying to compare things and really baseline them and be able to compare them equally. So very much appreciate the work that staff has done here. And that and that these bids were all very strong. Wanted to ask about, I feel very comfortable with the SLC, with approving SLC development as the top bid to go forward. My questions are more related to the backup bid and want to just kind of flesh that out a little bit with my fellow commissioners about, because that is part of the motion that would be today would be to actually formally approve the backup offer. And so I guess my question is, because I'm really we're looking at bid amounts, but also timing to closing. And it looks like the third option is a little faster, it's significantly faster potentially than the backup offer that we're being asked to consider, which is Miller United. So I'm curious about, you had mentioned we could approve that today or maybe table that and then talk about that in the future. I'm curious, we don't have obviously all of the terms in this public session, but there are some here in terms of now that it's public record that we're considering the price and also timing to close. And so I'm wondering if that is something that, if we look at it in the future, bids could be altered in any way, rebid for that backup opportunity.
Through the public bid process, the board always reserves the right to withdraw a property from consideration and to resolicit bids if it were interested in doing so. Staff's initial thought with requesting a backup bid was that it might provide some efficiency in us rolling onto a follow-on purchaser as maybe prove appropriate. However, that I would say is not the most common approach we take. Typically, there's a staff will ask for approval of a single bidder. And so certainly that would be an option. We only request the initial approval and then we conduct a subsequent bid offering in the future as the board directs.
Commissioner, could you clarify? I thought I heard you say something to the effect of, can the terms be changed during the negotiation?
That was not me being clear.
Okay.
Don't, I apologize. No, it would be that, it would be resoliciting at that point and then, but I guess the point I was trying to get across there is that there's a little more information to the bidders that we already have about kind of some of our priorities with respect to this particular thing, that if they would.
There may be a third option, and I'll look ahead for validation of what I'm going to say, but I think that the same bids could be looked at again at a future date.
Okay.
The same bid pool and a subsequent a secondary determination made at that time.
With these precise bids as they've presented them? Or is it just
I
the
think,
same people
yes,
with the opportunity to?
these exact bids as presented. So the options would be today with a primary and secondary. If today with a primary, and then if necessary, a future decision on this secondary.
Okay.
Or if the board pulling back the entire bid process, negating what's occurred so far and resoliciting.
I believe all that process, this is sort of off the cuff, but I believe all that process is fine, but I will note that all the offers come in with a lot of contingencies to withdraw their bid. So if you approved a backup, we'd be in a position of moving to talk to that backup and not necessarily being able to force that backup to honor the full terms of that offer.
Fair point.
So.
And that was Assistant Attorney General Ed
Yes.
Hamrick, offering legal advice.
Thank you. So I think that was my main thing, is just trying to understand kind of how strongly I'm seeing 2 and 3 as closer maybe than staff are. So I would like to understand kind of how much better do you deem that second offer?
And staff also, it's a kind of a multivariable comparison. Staff does not find it to be our second choice to be so definitively better than the third choice that I would say it's not open.
Okay.
I would say that there isn't judgment involved there. And I think that looking very closely at that is entirely appropriate.
So I guess there are 2 options. One might be approval of the winner of this bid and without a second. The other option is that we approve it first and second. So does the board have any desire to do one or the other?
I guess I can propose my option and see how that goes. But if you could put the motion back up that you have here, because I know there's that addition that we need to be including. Thank you. So I would move to approve the Weld County non-simultaneous exchange as presented on our screen, with the one change that that we exclude the backup position to Miller United. It's just for consideration.
I think this is Commissioner Chavez, just from, I don't know, just. It might be better to keep the backup option just because the market's changing so fast and we would be ready to move quickly. Obviously, if they were still interested at that point, but just from a point of view of efficiency, in the case of a failure in the first or backing out on the first.
So then it's a matter, of we're acting on it up front end faster, but it's potentially longer to close at the back end. So it's a longer deal, but we can get into it, which is fine too. Just wanted to vet that so that we fully acknowledging that. So without a second, that would fail.
All right, well, I'll entertain a motion. Is there a motion?
I think she just made it.
So yeah, so now, so I'm withdrawing that one.
I'm, all right,
I was saying there was no second to that, so then I was doing
All
that,
right.
that fails.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's right.
All right,
So, but
is
I,
there an alternative motion?
I can move that we, that this board adopt Weld County non-simultaneous exchange pursuant to the board order as presented in the presentation today.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. This is Commissioner Chavez.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the board motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And the board, the chair votes aye, and it's a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. And thank you, Matt. Thanks for work on this. I'm sorry. All right,
It's a team game.
moving on. We have a subsurface easement with Mallard Exploration for Weld County as well. Lots of activity in Weld County.
Yeah.
With Katie Stitt with us. Thank you, Katie.
Yes, good morning, commissioners. It's still morning, I think.
I keep checking every time someone says morning. I'm like, oh, it's still.
Just waiting for Mike to finish. Okay. For the record, Katie Stitt, oil and gas specialist, and today I'll be talking to you about a subsurface easement lease for Mallard Exploration. Last month, the board approved the subsurface easement lease form, and this will be the first use of that tool to protect state trust assets. Staff is bringing this item to the board for approval, but we anticipate asking the board for staff authority to approve these types of leases in the future at a future policy revision. Oh, I'm now clicking. So Mallard Exploration approached us back in 2019 as they prepared to drill their Anderson Fed wells in Weld County. These are located in central Weld County here. And if we zoom in a little bit more towards what their project is looking at, the State Land Board owns the lands that are on the left side of the map in the blue. The various lines on the map show the tracks of horizontal well bores. And there are 3 stages of horizontal well bores depicted on the map. The purple lines are wells that have been drilled and are producing. The green lines are wells that are in a planned stage, and the orange lines are wells that have been drilled but aren't currently producing. So as you can see, there are obviously quite a few wells planned for this area. And when Mallard came to us with their proposal, they knew they were going to have to do some interesting geometry when they drilled their wells for the area they want to produce. So today we're talking about this area in the red circle. You can see that there are some lines that cross our blue surface. And just to be clear, all of this is happening underground. None of this is happening on our surface. None of it is visible. If you go out and sit on the corner, you're not going to see any of this. Their surface location for where their well heads are actually located is that cluster of red dots kind of in the right of this circle. So to give a little bit more of a look at this project, this is a 3D representation of the project. And the map on the left is the map I just showed you. State trust land ownership is in the blue. The green is the surface owner, And the pink salmony color is the minerals that are being produced by these wells. And if you look at the 3D rendering, you can see how these wells kind of enter into the blue and then twist out into the pink, a little bit different showing of this. The important thing to take away from this is that because they're just entering us and exiting us, they're not producing anything from our subsurface estate, so we get no royalties on this. They don't have anything on our surface, so we're not getting a surface use agreement, and they're not producing our minerals, so we have no royalties from that piece. So staff completed a review of their project proposal when they brought it to us in 2019, and we looked at various variables that we outlined in your cover sheet to make sure that any future use of our subsurface estate wouldn't be impacted by them drilling these wells, and determined that it looked like it would not be. So we didn't have a tool at that point to approve them going forward. So we had them sign a letter agreement with us to indicate that they would come back and get the form from us once we had the tool in place. So with that letter agreement, they went ahead and drilled their wells. And there are 2 wellbores that are crossing our property. As a result, this subsurface easement is necessary because they are in our subsurface estate. And we are looking at using our standard charge of $7,500 per well, that they would be paying us $15,000 for the total project. It would be issued on our 30-year lease form and would be upfront the $15,000. So with those details, staff is recommending that the board approve the subsurface easement lease to Mallard Exploration as presented in the cover sheet in the presentation today. And I've included the text of the board order for your convenience, and I'll take any questions.
Are there questions?
Of course I have questions. Thank you, Katie. I apologize if I missed it. Can you speak to, so because this is something that we're kind of doing them solid and, and we get kind of nominal revenue from it, what are the protections that we have in terms of the condition of our property after this?
So typically when wells are drilled, depending on where you own your lands, they will, when they get plugged and abandoned, they'll be capped and it's below plow depth or some other determination that the COGCC imposes when they plug the wells. These are probably 1,000 feet or more below the surface of what you're looking at. Most wells stay in place. They're cemented, they're isolated out from aquifers or other producing formations, so they should be benign once the wells are wrapped up their life cycle. So there will be pipe sitting there, should be not doing anything. So the protection we have is not that they're going to remove the pipe. If they do something, say hypothetically, they get into trouble with the COGCC, the same protections that the COGCC grants to producing mineral owners or surface owners will subsequently get also handed to us, because those actions get taken on the wellbore. And if they are told to shut the wellbore down and plug it, they have to do it that way. So hopefully that answers your question. It's not like I can tell them to go dig it up, I guess.
Right. And I'm assuming that in our lease form, though, we talk through
yes,
identifications and have strong insurance requirements and have
all of those things are
all
in
of those things that if something that we can't even imagine happens, that they are still on the hook even after.
Correct.
That term.
Yep.
All right, are there other questions? Yes, Commissioner Braden.
Katie, thanks for the presentation. Maybe you said this and I just didn't understand correctly. So this fee, this $15,000 is for the 2 existing well bores that they went ahead and drilled, but with the understanding that once our policy was in place, they would pay for that. Did you mention that there would be additional wells in the future, and will they be coming back to us for additional easements?
When they initially approached us back in 2019, there were 3 wells they anticipated drilling that would come through our subsurface estate. And through subsequent planning processes and their analysis of their findings when they drilled the wells, they are not drilling this well in the green. And I got confirmation from Mallard that they have no intentions of moving forward with that well. The map on the COGCC will show this well until they withdraw that permit. Most permits expire within 3 years, so at some point this will fall off the map.
We don't anticipate.
I don't anticipate them coming back at this point.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Is there any public comment?
Members of the public, now's the time to use that raise hand button on your screen if you want to make a comment to this board. I'm not seeing any, Commissioner.
All right, I'm open to a motion.
This is Commissioner Chavez. I move we approve the subsurface easement for Millard exploration as described in the board. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes, and that's votes in a positive, and that is a unanimous support for this item. All right, moving on. The next item is an oil and gas leak for Rampike Resources Limited in Elbert County. Katie, excuse me.
That one's not.
That's fine. All right, sorry. Give me a second.
Not.
That's out here. This is where it's. Right.
A little presentation.
There it goes.
Oh, at the top.
I think we got so used to it, I just do auction lists that the other names of my presentations got a little.
Ready to go. Go.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Again, for the record, Katie Stitt, oil and gas specialist. And I'll be discussing with you a potential oil and gas lease that the staff would like to request to be issued to Rampike Resources. We do have a representative from Rampike who's available for any questions you might have. Neil Sharp is available virtually. So he is available. This proposal facilitates a resolution to a complex set of issues surrounding the abandonment of existing oil and gas facilities. Approval of this new lease will return a trust asset to a revenue generating position. It will remove an existing plugging liability from the public and return it to an oil and gas operator. It would improve stewardship outcomes as the new lease would come with recommended stipulations. And it would allow an operator to capitalize on current market conditions with an existing facility. Staff is bringing this item to the board as a recommended modifications to our standard oil and gas lease, and the issuance of a lease directly to a party require board approval. The subject property is located in Elbert County, approximately 3 miles south of the Lowry Ranch. The property was leased by a company called Smith Energy Corp, and that lease has been moving through a bankruptcy proceeding that Smith entered into back in 2019. Through that, staff and Rampike Resources attempted to make an effort to assign the existing lease that was in place on the property, but we were unable to make that happen in the aftermath of the bankruptcy case. The existing Smith Energy Corp lease will be terminated as a result of that bankruptcy case resolution. And pursuing this new lease with Rampike has several valuable benefits. So to go through a little bit of where we sit and kind of the decision-making process that staff went through. Smith Energy Corp currently has a bond in place for $25,000, which at the time was the blanket bond rate for the board's leases. That bond covers 3 leases that Smith Energy Corp abandoned through their bankruptcy. And on those 3 leases, there's a total of 10 wells. If we approve the new lease today, this lease would remove one of those leases from that Smith Energy Corp bond, and on that lease are 6 wells. So we're essentially transferring the bulk of the plugging liability onto a new lease. And we can use the 25,000 that we have from Smith Energy Corp to better spread across the remaining 4 wells that exist on the other 2 leases that would still be in Smith Energy Corp's name. We have not received any rentals or any type of royalty on the wells since 2018. These wells have been shut in. They're not sitting out there just willy-nilly. They've been appropriately shut in, but no money has come in from them. If we approve this lease, we'll get one of those leases back into a rental and a potential royalty paid situation. Smith Energy Corp's original lease was issued back in 1979, so obviously it's an older lease form. It's like, that wasn't me. So it's on an older lease form. If we issue the lease today, we're going to put it on our modern current lease form, so we'll have additional protections and enhancements in the verbiage that is in the lease. Back in 1979, there were stipulations to protect the land, but we have obviously greatly improved our stewardship stipulations that are included in leases. So old lease had none. We did go through our normal process in consulting with staff and CPW on recommendations for the property. So we would include new wildlife stipulations on this new lease. And currently as it sits, because the wells were abandoned during the bankruptcy process, COGCC has quote unquote the obligation to plug the wells. They've been abandoned and they're now listed in the orphan well program. If we approve the new lease, Ram Pike plans to take the fact that the board has approved this opportunity for him and formally approach the COGCC to transfer those 6 wells over to him so that he can then return them to production. He's had informal conversations with the commission and they have been open to this idea, but wanted a little bit more certainty that the land board was on board before they move forward with any kind of transferring. I would just like to also add that because of the way the orphan well program works, they have their own set of rules about the priority in which these wells would be plugged. And so we have no idea when this would happen. Directly north of this lease is another operator that's putting in horizontal well bores right now. And anytime you put in new horizontal well bores, you have to do something to make sure that the integrity of existing wells is kept. And a lot of times they'll shut in wells or they may have to go in and replug old wells. The fact that we would have 6 wells sitting on our property that have not been plugged and are just shut in, there's no operator out there to go out and ensure that they're safe, would mean that our lands would be not real desirable to move forward with any kind of future horizontal development that could involve us. So until the orphan well program plugged those wells, our lands would essentially have no real interest because those are liabilities on the property. Just as a nice benefit that adds in with doing this, we don't own the surface where this property is located. The fee owners who own it happen to be at lessees of the land board in Morgan County. So be helping out another party as well. So with all of those details, we would be proposing that this new lease allow the existing wells that are on the property to remain at their 12.5% royalty rate, which was the royalty rate at the time the original Smith Energy Corp lease was issued. This is obviously lower than the board's current royalty rate, but the plan to return these wells to production is really more economically feasible for Ram Pike at this royalty rate. But to facilitate if these this property were to become subject to horizontal wells going forward in the future, we would want those wells to be at the board's current rate. So any new wells drilled subsequent would be at the 20% royalty rate that's the board's current rate. The recommended new lease would have a 1-year primary term as opposed to the 5 years we usually give operators so that it facilitates a more rapid return to production on the lease. And the new lease would include general stipulation 3, which is we don't own the surface, but there are biological concerns on the property, as well as special stipulations related to the burrowing owl and swift fox that are pretty standard on most of the leases we issue in this area. And so with those, we are recommending that the board approve issuing this oil and gas lease to Rampike Resources. And I've included the text of the board order that was in your packet. And I'd be happy to take any questions, or if you have specific technical questions, Neil might be a better individual to answer them, but.
This is Commissioner Chop. I just have more knowledge to the bonds, the $25,000 bond. So if we hold it, we're not taking the money to do anything. We're just gonna move the bond as security, or how does that work?
Yeah. So for Smith Energy Corp, we are going to be taking their bond because they have liabilities on 2 other leases that they are not addressing. They've abandoned the lease and they're abandoning their plugging.
When you say we're taking the bond, are we taking the 25,000 cash, or
Yes.
in essence?
Yes.
Okay.
Like a security
Gotcha.
deposit.
Exactly.
Okay.
The $25,000 that Rampike would be posting is what we term as a lease bond. Our blanket bond amount currently is 100,000. This would be the only lease Rampike is currently obligated to bond because he'd be doing activities. He does have other leases with the land board that are in a primary term. So he's got a couple more years to plan what he would want to do with those before he would also be obligated to post bonding on those leases. So it's the same amount money wise, but there's some other provisions that come into play for the new lease and also how we can use the money for the other 2 properties that will not be addressed to the solution.
Thank you. Is the representative from Rampike interested in making any comments?
Mr. Sharp, would you like to make any comments?
Morning. No, I'm primary. I thank you for the time. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for entertaining this. I've been working with Katie on this for a while now, to say the least. But all part of the process. So, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer any. I think it's a good opportunity to take an existing asset and bring it back into production. I'm currently doing this out in Lincoln County. I like old vertical wells, so I think it could be a win-win for everybody. It's kind of up to what the commission would like to do, so.
Thank you. Any questions for, all right. Hearing none, is there other public comment?
Members of the public, feel free to use the raise hand feature to address the board. I'm not seeing any, Commissioner.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve oil and gas lease for Rampike Resources Limited as in accordance with the board order presented in our packet.
Is there a second?
I'll make the second with, this is Commissioner Braden, I'll make the second with the comment that this is a compliment you on a novel solution to a complicated problem that gets, a well or some wells off of the orphan well list, which we know is a huge problem and liability for the state, so.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of this indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Kate. All right, let me ask you, I'm going to hope we get done by noon, but would you like a slight break now? Do you want to power through? All right, and we'll keep going.
No,
All right. The next item is the solid minerals lease 102-477 and Ben Teschner.
yeah, we can do this.
It's the doctor who's in. Good, still morning. It's still morning.
Hopefully it will remain morning for the rest. I have Julie from Martin Marietta, who is also on the line to speak on this virtually if she would like and if the board would like her to do so. For the record, this is Ben Teschner, the Solid Minerals Manager for the Land Board. I'm here to talk about Solid Minerals Lease 102-477. and an expansion to this existing lease. The photo you see here this conveyor belt is taking sand and gravel from the existing lease area and taking it over across a county road to a privately owned parcel where they're doing the processing for the sand and gravel operation. The sand and gravel operation we saw yesterday on our board tour was probably a quarter the size of this one that we're going to talk about today. So the one we're talking about today would constitute a large sand and gravel operation for those of you who are keeping score at home. So the existing lease is 160 acres, and we're proposing to add 160 additional more acres. The applicant, Martin Marietta, believes this adds 4 to 5 years more to the mining life. And that results in $300,000 to $750,000, $300,000 to $750,000 in additional, mostly royalties for the school trust. This lease is located in the extreme western side of Weld County. Oops. Nick, could you kind of work here?
Let the record reflect that the assistant attorney.
Right, the laying of the hands is.
Multiple skills.
Laying of the hands.
Anyway, this is in the extreme west end of central Weld County. And also for this orange version of our state map, this is the minerals map. If you're not familiar, it's just more commonly appears in blue, which is our surface map. So zooming in, this is the parcel in question. We own a full 640 of minerals only. So there's no state surface involved in this at all. You can see here, this is the existing mining area within the yellow existing lease boundary. And the conveyor belt you saw runs about like this over this county road and across over to where they're processing, which is behind the legend on the map, which I probably should have done a little better job on when I created it. There's some other interesting things going on this map that I do want to point out, especially based on the things we saw yesterday. This is an area where there's been extensive sand and gravel mining in the past, and I can't tell you exactly what that past is. But here are some old sand and gravel pits that have been reclaimed to ponds, similar to some of the ones that we saw yesterday. So this is a sort of this is sort of in the neighborhood, if you will.
What's that river creek?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I can definitely come up with that for you if you'd like.
Is there recreation going on in those ponds? And change the subject a little bit, but.
I don't know. These are private lands. I don't know beyond that. So anyway, we're proposing the proposal in front of you is to expand this lease area to include not just the bit in yellow, but also this bit here in purple and now in red as well. Want to emphasize again, this is on split estate, so we are a minerals only owner here. We have one other lease on this property for oil and gas. Martin Marietta has worked with this lessee in the past and will continue to work with them. They are also the lessee on the parcel as well as the new parcel. And there are some oil and historic and one active oil and gas well on the property. And this is something that they have been working with throughout this lease process and are familiar with. There were no ecological concerns that came up during this review process. And again, since we don't own the surface, we have limited control over those types of stipulations. To summarize, the additional acreage would be at $5 an acre, and actually the existing acreage as well, resulting in an additional $800 a year in rent. That's sort of the peanuts part of the process. At 55 cents a ton, which is the royalty rate on this lease, We anticipate that that would bring in between $60,000 and $150,000 a year, depending on production, of course.
And that's our share.
Yes, that is only our share. That's correct. So this projects 4 to 5 additional years of mining and, as I said before, $300,000 to $750,000 in additional revenue over that whole period of time. Staff is recommending therefore that the board approve 160-acre expansion to this lease with Martin Marietta Materials. And here's the board order for your convenience.
Yes. Mr. Braden?
I have a comment and a question. The comment, crack research team over here. That it's the Poudre River.
Excellent.
And the question that comes out of that is, and maybe this happens at the DRMS level. What do we do to protect that really close by stream in these cases?
Yeah, good question.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah.
What do we do versus what do other regulatory authorities do in the interest of protecting the Poudre River, which goes right? I understand most gravel operations that are alluvial in nature are going to be close to
Right.
some river,
Yes.
either ancient or current. So my question is, what do we stipulate or do other regulatory agencies stipulate to protect those rivers?
And quickly before you answer, this is Commissioner Clark. It's not other regulatory agencies because we are not a regulatory authority, as Bill Ryan noted yesterday.
Yes,
totally accept that.
Thank you for that
clarification. Clarification,
Yes.
correction.
We get better as we go.
So I'm going to answer this generally about our process, and then I'm going to see if Julie has anything that she'd like to add for this process, this site specifically. Generally speaking, as you astutely pointed out, the alluvial gravels deposits are occurring in these environments. So first, this is a very common scenario that I'm going to use the term we here as society deal with frequently. We as the land board generally defer to DRMS for this type of regulation because I am not a reclamation expert, they are. And so during the permit expansion process that Martin Marietta will have to go through in order to incorporate this area into their mining operation, they will be working with DRMS, and I am confident that these issues will come up and be dealt with through that process and whatever public processes are part of that permitting action.
Thank you. With
Not sure,
representative
if I may,
Go ahead.
I'd just like to see if Julie would have
Yeah.
is on the line and has anything to add to that, what I just said there.
This is Julie Michaelis with Martin Marietta. We do have to go through the whole process with the Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety. And we also have to, normally we would be going through a county process with Weld County, but this area has been incorporated into the city of Windsor. So we'll be going through a whole permitting process with the city of Windsor also. And in that process, between those two agencies, that will determine how much of a setback we have from the river to protect the river itself, and kind of the design on when we create these cells, how they discharge water to the river, or if there's a flood, how the spillways kind of help take some of that water to slow the flow of the river down during a flood, and then how that water gets back to the river. So we'll be working with City of Windsor also on a floodplain permit that kind of helps stabilize that river too.
Thank
I
you.
don't know if that answered all of your questions.
Good, well done. Thank you. So are there any public comments?
Members of the public, use the raise hand feature if you'd like to address the board. I'm not seeing any, Commissioner.
All right. Then we'll close that portion of this. Is there a motion?
I move to approve Solid Minerals lease expansion for lease 102477 in accordance with the board order as presented in our packet.
Commissioner Chavez, I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Motion is unanimous. Thank you very much. We have one more item.
Thank you,
On the
Commissioners.
formal, two more items on the formal agenda, the board leasing agenda. And let's see.
Commissioner Heath, I'm gonna take that for Andy,
Oh,
if
good.
you don't mind.
Thank you.
The understudy.
The understudy.
Yes.
For the record, Assistant Director Nick Massey, presenting the board leasing agenda for May 2022. In your packets, you've got a request for approval on 6 new leases, 1 commercial, 2 road access permits, 2 recreation leases, and 1 right-of-way. I was busy queuing up all manner of staff in case you had questions on anything from the board leasing agenda while the thing was trying to go to sleep. Thank you, Ed. And so happy to entertain any discussion. Otherwise, happy to have a motion as well for approval on those items.
I want to report that as a walk-on, Ed did a fine job.
I learned really quickly.
All right. Are there any questions about proposed leases?
This is Commissioner Braden. I have one question. It's just really a clarification. And maybe Jared, you're going to be the person with an answer to this. There are two leases related to Rocky Mountain Power. One of them, lease number 3 on our agenda, is specifically related to Gateway South transmission. But lease number, well, listed number 6 is also with Rocky Mountain Power, but it doesn't indicate which power line that is for. Is that? South?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
It was tempting to mention in the spirits of DEI that the Magnificent Mountain Men Club was perhaps not to be too exclusive, but.
I was just wondering how magnificent they really are.
Sufficiently.
All right. Is there any other discussion? Is there any public comments?
Members of the public, if you'd wish to make a comment, raise hand. I'm not seeing any.
I'm open for a motion.
This is Commissioner Chavez. I move we approve the board leasing agenda for May 2022.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of this motion indicate by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. We have one more item, the minutes review for the board meeting of April 2022. And then we will move into executive session for the director annual review. So for the minutes of the board, are there any folks who would like to make any comments or suggested revisions to the minutes? Hearing none, is there approval? A motion for approval?
I move to approve the April 13th, 2022 board minutes.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of April 2022 indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. This is the closing. Oh, pardon, Commissioner Clark.
I was just wondering, since Christine was not at that meeting, is it appropriate would she need to abstain from that vote or on the minutes, or just that she's?
I would like to defer to the Assistant Attorney General for that question.
Thank you. This is Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General. It would certainly be fine if Commissioner Scanlon would like to abstain, given that this is a small body and the great flexibility given to small bodies under Robert's rules and other procedural rules. I think it is probably not a critical answer one way or the other. But however the board as a collective would like to handle it would be appropriate and easily defendable.
I think that's fine. I just wanted
Commissioner Scanlon, in her healing.
I'm happy to abstain for sure.
So the motion is.
It was habit.
And 1 abstention. So we wish you much healing energy. And then further, yes.
She's gonna stay with us for a little bit, maybe just making sure you're not dismissing Commissioner Scanlon too quickly.
All right.
Because she's gonna be with us for the executive session.
Thank you very much. On this item, we are showing that there's 4 votes in favor and 1 abstention. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All right, and then I want to, just in the interest of a small body again, thank the staff for providing cinnamon rolls and all the other wonderful things that you provided. We really do thank you all very much for your hospitality. Good work. All right, let's move quickly. Yes.
What is the procedure here? Are we gonna take a break before the?
Yeah.
and are we gonna-
Nick has his hand up.
I've got a few things that I can comment on that. There's actually some things we need to do with the room, like remove all staff, pretty much, period. I need to do a few things with the Zoom so that Commissioner Scanlon can participate and everybody else. If you're listening, panelists, attendees, other than Christine Scanlon, please leave. And then that will make it easy on me to clear out the meeting. And then I can lock the meeting so that the only person who can be in the meeting virtually is Commissioner Scanlon.
I need to do a brief dance in it, or in.
And what I'd like to have is have Ed do the dance on the recording, and then I'll end the recording,
Yeah, let's record.
and I will leave as well. So we've got a few things to work out.
All right, so are we saying we're on a break until what time?
If-
5 minutes. Why don't we do, if I can suggest, this is Ed Hammer, if I can suggest.
Hold on a second, please.
Hang on. If I could suggest, I will do my little request for the motion. We'll have that approved presumably, and then everybody can get lunch and get out. And when you guys are ready to get started and the tech's ready to get started, you don't have to wait on me at all.
All right,
That'd be great.
so we'll be in this room and we'll return to this room in approximately, what do you need, you think?
5 minutes is plenty.
Okay, sounds good.
So just,
Courtney had a
He's gonna
question.
do his dance.
And once again, thank you, Commissioner Miller, for continuing to join us. We appreciate all the hospitality from Moffett County, and Bandy, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Does anybody have the keys to the Highlander?
Which one? Which one?
I was told gray.
oh, I've got the great keys to the
Okay,
great.
I'll get with you a little bit later. I need to
Okay,
get some
great.
signs out
Okay,
for us.
I don't recall seeing signs in there, but
They're small.
They're small signs.
okay. Yes, I'll be done in just a moment.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Wait.
Yeah, so we can get the motion. Next on the agenda, it's necessary to go into executive session. Sorry, this is Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. And it's necessary to go into executive session next to discuss the Director's Annual Review, which as a personnel matter is authorized for executive session under 246402(3)A B1 of the Colorado Revised Statute, when the employee requests that the discussion be held in executive session. Director Ryan has requested that and in writing, which is part of the record. And so at this point, I would request a motion from the commissioners to go into executive session to conduct the Director's Annual Review.
So moved. This is Commissioner Chavez.
Is there a second?
Second, Commissioner Clark.
Been moved and seconded that we go into executive session. Personnel matter for the Director's Annual Review. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
And now you can make noise.
No, I'm good. Yeah, so I just,